You think you can just steal what belongs to your sister? The words cut through the Montana twilight like a whip crack. Clara Hale stood in the dust, her father's face twisted with rage, her sister Vivian weeping theatrically on the porch. Behind her, a stranger on horseback, the wealthy rancher who'd chosen the wrong daughter. In 30 seconds, Clara would make a choice that would shatter her family, ignite a war across two ranches, and force her to fight for survival in a world that never wanted her. But first, she had to find the courage to say one word: no. Welcome to a story of grit, betrayal, and impossible choices. Stay until the end to see how the forgotten daughter became the woman no one could break. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. The Hale estate had been dying for as long as Clara could remember. Not the dramatic death of a fire or flood, but the slow, humiliating kind. Paint peeling in long strips from the main house, fences sagging like old men, cattle sold off one season at a time until only 12 head remained in pastures that once held hundreds. The kind of death that happened when a proud man refused to admit he was drowning. Clara's father, Edmund Hale, still wore his good suit to Sunday dinner every week, even though the cuffs were frayed and the shoulders had gone shiny with age. He still demanded the silver be polished, though half the pieces had been sold years ago. And he still spoke of the Hale name as if it meant something beyond these dusty Montana hills where nobody remembered and fewer cared. But Clara knew the truth. She'd known it since she was 12 years old, mucking stables while her father tutored Vivian in French verbs and piano scales. The Hale estate wasn't a ranch anymore. It was a stage set, a pretty lie maintained for one purpose: to marry Vivian off to money. And now, after 18 years of preparation, the audience had finally arrived. "Stand still, Clara. For heaven's sake, stand still!" Clara gritted her teeth as her stepmother, Margaret, yanked the brush through her hair with enough force to make her eyes water. They were in Clara's small room, barely larger than a closet, at the back of the house, the room that had been the housekeeper's quarters before the housekeeper had been let go. Through the thin walls, she could hear Vivian's delighted laughter echoing from the grand bedroom at the front. "This is hopeless," Margaret muttered, abandoning the brush and reaching for pins. "Your hair has more knots than a rope." "Maybe because I spent the morning repairing the south fence," Clara said quietly. "The posts were rotting through." "That's Jacob's job." "Jacob quit 2 weeks ago. No one's paying him." Margaret's hands paused for just a moment. Then she jammed a pin into Clara's scalp hard enough to make her wince. "Well, you should have said something. Your father would have." "Father knows." Clara met her stepmother's eyes in the cracked mirror. "He just doesn't care about fences when Vivian needs a new dress." The slap came fast, sharp across her cheek. Not hard enough to bruise, but enough to sting. Margaret had perfected that particular blow over the years, painful, but leaving no evidence. "You will not speak of your sister that way," Margaret hissed. "Vivian is this family's future. The Mercer boy arrives in less than an hour, and if your jealous tongue costs us this opportunity, I swear to you, Clara, you'll wish—" "I'll wish what?" Clara stood, pulling away from her stepmother's grip. "That I'd been born prettier? That I'd spent 18 years learning to smile and curtsy instead of keeping this place from collapsing? I already know I'm the wrong daughter, Margaret. You don't have to keep reminding me." For a moment, something almost like shame flickered across Margaret's face. Then it hardened again into the mask Clara knew so well. "Wear the gray dress," Margaret said coldly. "Not the blue one. You're to serve tea, not sit for it. And if Mr. Mercer or his son speak to you, you will be polite and brief. Do you understand?" Clara understood perfectly. She was furniture, decoration, part of the stage set, like the polished silver and her father's fake smile. She was not the show. Colton Mercer arrived at exactly 3 o'clock, which told Clara everything she needed to know about him before he'd even dismounted. She watched from the kitchen window as the small party crested the ridge. 3 riders, 2 pack horses, and enough dust to announce them a mile out. The man in front sat his horse like he'd been born in the saddle, straight-backed and easy. The kind of rider who could go all day without tiring. Even from a distance, she could see quality in everything: the cut of his coat, the shine of his tack, the powerful sorrel gelding that probably cost more than the Hale estate's remaining cattle combined. "He's here!" Vivian's shriek carried through the entire house. "Mama! Mama! He's here! Clara turned from the window and picked up the tea tray she'd prepared. Her hands were steady. They were always steady, even when everything else was falling apart. By the time she reached the parlor, the performance had already begun. Edmund Hale stood in the center of the room, one hand extended in welcome, his voice booming with false heartiness. Mr. Mercer, what an absolute pleasure. We've been anticipating your arrival with great excitement. May I present my daughter, Vivian Hale? Vivian swept forward in a rustle of blue silk, her blonde curls perfectly arranged, her smile bright enough to hurt. She extended one delicate hand. Mr. Mercer, we're so honored to receive you. Clara set the tea tray on the side table, keeping her eyes down. She'd seen Vivian perform this role 100 times, the gracious lady, the perfect flower of frontier society. And she had to admit, her sister was good at it. Vivian had spent 18 years preparing for this exact moment, and it showed in every practiced gesture. Miss Hale. The voice was deeper than Clara expected, with a trace of something Western and rough underneath the educated polish. The honor's mine. Clara couldn't help it. She glanced up. Colton Mercer was younger than she'd imagined, maybe 25, with sun-darkened skin and the kind of lean, strong build that came from actual work, not just riding for pleasure. His dark hair needed cutting, and there was a thin scar along his jawline that suggested he'd lived harder than his expensive clothes implied. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, gray and steady, taking in the room with an assessment that felt less like a social call and more like a land survey. Those eyes swept past Vivian's smile, past Edmund's eager handshake, past Margaret's calculating stare, and landed directly on Clara. She froze, one hand still on the teapot. For a moment that stretched too long, Colton Mercer simply looked at her. Not the dismissive glance servants usually received, but a real look, curious, direct, uncomfortably thorough. Then his mouth quirked slightly, and he turned back to Edmund. Your home is lovely, Mr. Hale. The lie was so smooth, Clara almost believed it herself. Please, sit, sit. Edmund gestured to the best chairs, the ones that weren't splitting at the seams. You must be exhausted from your journey. Clara, pour the tea. Don't stand there like a post. Clara moved forward, focusing on the ritual of pouring. Cup, saucer, 3/4 full, handle to the right. She'd done this 1,000 times. So tell me, Mr. Mercer, Vivian said, settling herself in the chair opposite their guest with practiced grace. How was your journey from the Mercer Ranch? I've heard it's quite magnificent. It's large, Colton said simply. He accepted the tea Clara offered without looking at her. My father built it from nothing, and he's proud of that. As he should be, Edmund jumped in. The Mercer name is legendary in these parts. 15,000 acres, I'm told. And expanding? Depending on the year, Colton's voice was carefully neutral. We're looking to diversify. Timber rights, water agreements, possibly some mining interests. My father believes in growth. A wise philosophy, Margaret purred. And I understand you're looking to establish a family of your own? How progressive. There it was. The hook, baited and cast. Colton set down his teacup with a click that seemed too loud in the suddenly tense room. My father believes a man of my position should marry well. He's made his preferences clear. And what do you believe, Mr. Mercer? Vivian leaned forward, all innocence and interest. For the first time, Colton smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. I believe, he said slowly, that I've spent my whole life following my father's preferences. Maybe it's time I made a choice of my own. Clara's hand trembled slightly as she poured the next cup. There was something happening in this room, currents moving beneath the polite words, and she didn't understand any of it. Very independent, Edmund said, his jovial tone sounding strained. I admire that, Mr. Mercer. A man should forge his own path. Speaking of which, perhaps you'd like to see our grounds. Vivian could show you the gardens. They're quite lovely this time of year. Actually, Colton said, and his gray eyes found Clara again, I'd like to see the stables. Your man at the gate mentioned you have some Morgan stock. I'm interested in bloodlines. The room went very quiet. Oh, well, the stables are hardly, Margaret started. I'd be happy to show you, Clara heard herself say. Every head swiveled toward her. Vivian's eyes were wide with shock. Margaret's face had gone white. Edmund looked like he might swallow his tongue. But Colton Mercer just stood, brushing dust from his pants. "Perfect. Miss Clara," she said. "Clara Hale." "Miss Clara Hale." He said it like he was memorizing it. "Lead the way." The walk to the stables was the longest 100 yards of Clara's life. She could feel her family's eyes burning into her back, could practically hear Margaret's scream of rage being swallowed behind clenched teeth. This wasn't the script. This wasn't how any of this was supposed to go. "You don't have to do this," Clara said quietly as they crossed the dusty yard. "Look at the horses, I mean. They're nothing special." "I'm not here for the horses." Clara stopped walking, turned. "Then why are you here?" Colton Mercer studied her with those steady gray eyes, and Clara had the uncomfortable feeling of being measured against some invisible standard. "How old are you?" 21. "Married?" "No." "Why not?" The question was so blunt Clara almost laughed. "Because I'm not the daughter anyone wants to marry." "Why not?" he asked again. Clara gestured at herself. The plain gray dress that had been mended a dozen times, her work-roughened hands, her face that had never been anything special even before the sun and wind had weathered it. "Look at me. Then look at Vivian. The answer's pretty obvious." "Your sister's beautiful," Colton agreed. "Like a china doll. Delicate. Decorative." The words should have hurt, but his tone was so flat they just sounded like observations. "And fragile," he continued. "I've met 100 girls like her, pretty things who'd shatter the first time life hit them hard." He turned and started walking again, toward the stables. "I'm not here for delicate, Miss Hale. I'm here for strong." Clara's heart was beating too fast. "I don't understand." "Yes, you do." Colton pulled open the stable door, and the familiar smell of hay and horse sweat washed over them. "Your fence posts were rotting. You fixed them yourself. Your father's broke, but he's spending money on dresses and tea sets to impress me. And you're serving tea in a house that should have been yours, watching your family sell your sister like livestock, and you haven't said a single word against it." He turned to face her in the dim light of the stable, and Clara saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. Not pity, something harder. Recognition. "That takes a kind of strength most people don't have," Colton said quietly. "The kind I need." "Need for what?" "To survive my father." The words came out bitter. "Victor Mercer built an empire, and he's not about to let his only son run it into the ground. He wants me married to someone impressive, someone polished and pretty and politically useful." Colton's jaw tightened. "Someone like your sister." "Then why—" "Because I'm tired of being a piece on my father's chessboard," Colton cut her off. "And I think maybe you are too." Claire's hands were shaking now. She clasped them together, hard. "Mr. Mercer, I think you should go back to the house. Vivian is everything you could want in a wife. She's educated, refined, beautiful, and completely unprepared for the life I'm offering." "Which is?" "A ranch war." Colton said it simply, like he was discussing the weather. "My father's expanding into territory the neighboring ranchers consider theirs. We've already had cattle poisoned, fences cut, 2 barns burned. Last month, someone took a shot at our foreman." He paused. "This isn't a game, Clara. The woman who marries me won't be sitting in parlors drinking tea. She'll be standing beside me when the bullets fly." Clara's mouth had gone dry. "You're insane." "Probably." Colton moved deeper into the stable, running a hand along one of the stall doors. The wood was splitting, rotted by years of neglect. "But I'm also right. Your sister would last maybe a week before my father broke her. But you?" He looked back at her. "You've been fighting your whole life. You just never had anything worth fighting for." "And you think you're worth fighting for?" "No." Colton's smile was sharp. "But freedom is." The word hung in the dusty air between them. Freedom. Clara turned it over in her mind, tasting it like something unfamiliar. What did freedom even look like for someone like her? She'd never known anything but this: the failing estate, her father's disappointment, her stepmother's casual cruelty, the endless work that never changed anything. "I have 2 horses saddled outside," Colton said quietly. In about 10 minutes, I'm riding back toward the Mercer Ranch. If you're on the second horse, we'll be married within the week. If you're not, he shrugged. I'll tell your father your sister's lovely, and I'll think about his offer. You're asking me to choose, Clara whispered. I'm asking you to save yourself. Colton's voice was gentle for the first time. Because nobody else is going to do it for you. Clara didn't remember walking back to the house. One moment she was standing in the stable, Colton's words echoing in her head. The next, she was pushing through the kitchen door, her mind spinning. Vivian found her in the hallway. What did you do? Her sister's whisper was venomous. He asked for you. Why would he ask for you? I don't know, Clara said honestly. You did something, said something. You're trying to steal him. Vivian, I didn't. Everything I've worked for, 18 years. Vivian's voice was rising, hysteria creeping in. I learned French. I learned piano. I learned how to walk and talk and smile and be perfect. And you just took it. Miss Hale. Colton's voice cut through Vivian's building shriek. He stood in the parlor doorway, hat in hand. Both of you. Your father would like a word. The parlor had transformed into a courtroom. Edmund sat in his chair like a judge on a bench, Margaret standing rigid beside him. Colton remained near the door, expression unreadable. And Vivian and Clara stood in the center, like prisoners waiting for a verdict. Mr. Mercer has made his intentions clear, Edmund said, and his voice shook with barely controlled rage. He wishes to formalize a courtship with Clara. Vivian made a sound like a wounded animal. This is, of course, unexpected, Edmund continued, not looking at Clara. And I've explained to our guest that Clara is not, that is, she hasn't been prepared for. He stopped, struggling. Mr. Mercer, perhaps if you spent more time with both my daughters, you might reconsider. I won't. Colton's voice was flat. I've made my choice. But why? Vivian's shriek could probably be heard in the next county. What does she have that I don't? Colton looked at Clara, just looked at her, long and steady. Calluses, he said finally. The word landed like a slap. You're making a mistake, Margaret said, her voice cold. Clara is not suitable for a man of your position. She's uneducated, unrefined, completely unprepared for society. I don't need society, Colton interrupted. I need a partner. She's worthless, Edmund exploded, finally looking at Clara with all the contempt he'd been hiding for 21 years. Do you understand? She has no dowry, no education, no accomplishments of any kind. She's a servant in her own home because that's all she's good for. You want her? He stabbed a finger toward Vivian. This is my daughter, the one I raised, the one I invested in, the one who matters. Clara felt something crack inside her chest. She'd known, of course, had always known, but hearing it said out loud, in front of witnesses, with such absolute certainty, it was like being gutted. Mr. Hale, Colton said quietly, with all due respect, you're an idiot. The room went silent. I've spent the last 3 hours watching your family, Colton continued, his voice conversational, but his eyes hard. You've got a daughter who can play piano and speak French, and another who kept your ranch from complete collapse. You've got a show horse and a workhorse, and you're trying to sell me the show horse while the workhorse is the only thing keeping you alive. He turned to Edmund. So yes, I'm choosing Clara, not despite her calluses, but because of them. This is insane, Margaret hissed. Maybe, Colton looked at Clara, but it's her choice to make, not yours. And there it was, the moment Clara had been hurtling toward since Colton Mercer rode up that dusty trail. Everyone was staring at her, waiting. Clara, her father said, and his voice was dangerous. If you do this, if you embarrass this family by throwing yourself at a man who's clearly toying with you, you will not be welcome back. Do you understand? This is your home, your family. We've fed you, clothed you, given you a roof over your head your entire life. And this is how you repay us? By saving myself, Clara heard herself say. The words came from somewhere deep and buried. Yes, I think it is. You ungrateful... I fixed the fences, Clara said, louder now. I mucked the stables. I mended the tack, fed the horses, repaired the roof, kept the books, cooked the meals. I did everything while you polished Vivian like a prize pig for slaughter. And you call me ungrateful? How dare you? Margaret started. I dare because I have nothing left to lose, Clara shot back. You've already made it clear I'm worthless, that I don't matter, that I'm just furniture in my own home. She turned to Colton, and her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. You're offering me a way out? I'm offering you a choice, Colton corrected. It won't be easy. My father's going to hate you. The ranch is dangerous, and I can't promise you'll be happy. I'm not happy now. Then we have that in common. Colton held out his hand. So, you coming? Clara looked at that outstretched hand, looked at her father's purple face, her stepmother's rage, her sister's tears, and she thought, what do I actually owe these people? The answer came quick and clear. Nothing. I need to pack, Clara said. No! Vivian lunged forward, grabbing Clara's arm. You can't just leave. You can't just take what's mine. He was never yours, Vivian, Clara said gently, pulling free. And neither was I. Clara owned almost nothing, which made packing quick. 2 dresses, both mended, a spare pair of boots, a few pieces of her mother's jewelry that Edmund hadn't sold yet, small things, sentimental rather than valuable. The leather work gloves she'd bought herself, a photograph of her mother, the only one that remained. She was rolling everything into a tight bundle when Vivian appeared in the doorway. He's using you, her sister said. Her face was blotchy from crying, but her voice was venomous. Don't you see? He's doing this to humiliate Father, to prove some kind of point, and when he's done, he'll throw you away like garbage. Clara tied off the bundle. Maybe. And you're going anyway? Yes. Why? Vivian's voice cracked. Why are you doing this to me? I needed this, Clara. This was supposed to be my chance. Your chance to what? Clara turned to face her sister. To marry a stranger so Father can pay his debts? To spend the rest of your life smiling and pretending in a house that might kill you? That's not a chance, Vivian. That's a prison. It's better than this. Vivian gestured at the tiny room, the cracked walls, the entire dying estate. At least I'd be someone. At least I'd matter. You already matter, Clara said quietly. You just don't know it yet. Don't. Vivian's voice turned cold. Don't you dare pity me. You're the one leaving with a man who'll regret choosing you before you reach the property line. You're the one who's going to fail so spectacularly that even Father will feel sorry for you. And when you come crawling back, if they let you crawl back, I'm gonna laugh. The words should have hurt. Maybe they did. But Clara had spent 21 years absorbing her family's cruelty, and she'd developed calluses there too. Goodbye, Vivian, she said, picking up her bundle. Her sister didn't respond, just stood in the doorway, crying silent tears that might have been grief or might have been rage. Clara didn't look back. Colton was waiting by the horses exactly as he'd promised. Edmund and Margaret stood on the porch like judges at an execution, their faces carved from stone. Last chance, Colton said quietly as Clara approached. You can still change your mind. Can I? Clara looked up at the house, at the peeling paint and sagging roof, at her father's contemptuous stare and her stepmother's cold fury. Because it seems like I made this choice a long time ago. I just didn't know it until today. Colton smiled. A real smile this time, something warm and almost surprised. Yeah, he said, I know the feeling. He helped her onto the second horse, a sturdy bay mare with kind eyes. Clara settled into the saddle, and for the first time in hours, something in her chest loosened. She knew horses, understood them. This, at least, made sense. Clara! Edmund's voice cracked across the yard like a whip. She turned in the saddle to face him. Her father stood at the porch rail, gripping it so hard his knuckles had gone white. If you ride away with this man, you are no longer my daughter. Do you understand? No longer a Hale. You'll have nothing. Be nothing. Clara looked at the man who'd spent 21 years telling her she wasn't good enough, who'd fed her scraps and given her rags while he dressed Vivian in silk, who'd worked her like a mule and called her worthless. Then I'll finally have something in common with the Hale name, she said, and she turned her horse toward the trail. They rode in silence for the first mile, the Hale estate shrinking behind them until it was just a smudge against the horizon. Clara didn't look back. She'd spent her whole life looking at that place. She was done. "You handled that well," Colton said eventually. "I called my father worthless. He deserved it." Colton glanced at her. "You know they're going to spread stories about you, that you seduced me, stole me from your sister, betrayed your family." "I know." "People will believe it. You'll be called a lot of names." "I've been called names my whole life," Clara said. "At least these ones will be my choice." Colton laughed, a surprised, genuine sound. "You're tougher than I thought. You chose me for my calluses, remember? I'm starting to think I underestimated them." They rode on as the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the Montana sky in shades of orange and gold. Clara's body ached from the unfamiliar saddle, and her mind kept circling back to what she'd just done, the life she'd just abandoned, the family she'd just destroyed. But underneath the fear and uncertainty, there was something else, something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. "Colton?" she said quietly. "Yeah? Why did you really choose me?" Clara kept her eyes on the trail ahead. "And don't tell me it's because of my calluses. There are plenty of strong women in Montana. Why me?" For a long moment, Colton didn't answer. Then, "You want the truth? Please?" "Because when I walked into your house today, I saw myself." His voice was rough. "Different circumstances, different prison, but the same trap. Family that sees you as property, a future mapped out by people who don't give a damn what you want. And I thought," he paused, "I thought maybe if I could save you, I could save myself too." Clara turned to look at him, really look at him, and she saw past the expensive clothes and confident manner to something underneath, something tired and trapped and desperately fighting. "You said your father's going to hate me," she said. "He's going to try to break you." "What if he succeeds?" Colton met her eyes, and his smile was sharp and dangerous. "Then we break him first." It wasn't a promise. It was a declaration of war. And Clara, who'd spent her whole life being broken, found herself smiling back. "Tell me about the ranch," she said. "Tell me what I'm walking into." So as they rode through the gathering dusk, Colton talked. He told her about the Mercer Empire, 15,000 acres of prime Montana rangeland, timber forests, water rights that controlled half the county. He told her about his father, Victor Mercer, who'd built it all from nothing and defended it with lawyers, bribes, and when necessary, violence. He told her about the expansion plans, the neighboring ranchers who were fighting back, the fires and poisonings, and midnight threats. "We're not the good guys," Colton said bluntly. "My father's stolen water, bribed officials, run families off land they'd held for generations. He calls it progress, building something lasting, but I've seen what it costs." "Then why not stop him?" "Because he's dying." The words came out flat. "Cancer. The doctors give him maybe a year, and he's determined to finish his empire before he goes, no matter who he has to destroy to do it." Colton's hands tightened on the reins. "When I take over, I'll fix what I can, make things right. But until then, you need to survive," Clara finished. "We need to survive," he corrected. "Together." The words settled over them like a vow. They rode on into the darkness, and behind them the Hale estate vanished completely. Clara didn't know what waited ahead, didn't know if Colton was her salvation or just another cage with different bars. But for the first time in her life, she'd made a choice that was entirely her own. And that, Clara thought, was worth whatever came next. They camped that night under a sky so full of stars it looked like someone had punched holes in a black canvas. Colton made a fire while Clara tended the horses, falling into an easy rhythm born from years of ranch work. When she returned to the fire, he'd laid out bedrolls on opposite sides and was working on something with his knife. "We should reach the ranch by tomorrow afternoon," he said, not looking up. "I sent word ahead, but my father's going to be surprised." His mouth quirked. Unpleasantly. Clara sat down across from him. "Tell me about him. Really tell me." Colton's knife stilled. "Victor Mercer is the hardest man I've ever known. He came west with nothing, literally nothing, just the clothes on his back and a knife in his boot. Built the ranch through work and luck and ruthlessness. He paused. Mostly ruthlessness. But he's your father. He's a force of nature, Colton corrected. Fathers are supposed to, I don't know, care, protect, love. The word came out bitter. Victor sees the world as territory to conquer. That includes me. And your mother? Dead. 10 years now. Something flickered across Colton's face. Grief, quickly buried. She was the only thing that made him human. When she died, he just hardened. Turned the ranch into his only legacy. Clara pulled her knees up to her chest. He wanted you to marry someone impressive. He wanted me to marry the daughter of Judge Morrison, 60 years old, influential, controls half the county courts. His daughter's pretty enough, educated, politically connected. Colton's voice was toneless. She's also cruel, vicious. I've seen her beat a horse bloody for stumbling. I've watched her humiliate servants for amusement. But she's useful to my father's plan, so you were supposed to marry her anyway. Until I met you. Colton finally looked up, and the firelight made his gray eyes look almost silver. I'm not a good man, Clara. I've done things for my father that keep me awake at night, threatened people, helped run families off their land. I've got blood on my hands. Then why tell me this? Clara's voice was quiet. Why not let me think you're some kind of hero? Because you deserve the truth. Colton's jaw tightened. You're walking into a war and you need to know what you're fighting for. I can't promise you happiness or safety or even basic decency from the people around us. All I can promise is honesty and a fighting chance. Clara stared into the fire, watching the flames dance. My father used to tell me I was worthless, she said quietly. Every day. Sometimes with words, sometimes just with looks. And I believed him. Thought maybe if I worked harder, did more, fixed enough fences and cooked enough meals, he'd see me. She laughed softly. Stupid, right? No, Colton said. Human. When you offered me a way out, I almost said no, because at least at the Hale estate, I knew the rules, knew how to survive. Clara looked up at him. But then I thought, what's the point of surviving if you're already dead inside? They sat in silence for a moment, two broken people on opposite sides of a fire, bound together by choices that neither of them fully understood yet. We're a mess, Colton said finally. Clara smiled. Yeah, we really are. This is probably going to be a disaster. Probably. My father's going to hate you. I'm counting on it. Colton laughed, surprised and genuine. You know what, Clara Hale? I think we might actually survive this. Don't jinx it, Clara said, but she was smiling too. That night, wrapped in a thin bedroll under the Montana stars, Clara slept deeper than she had in years. And if she dreamed of the Hale estate burning behind her, well, some things deserved to burn. Tomorrow she'd reach the Mercer Ranch. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. But tonight, for the first time in her life, Clara Hale was free. And that was enough. The Mercer Ranch appeared on the horizon like a kingdom carved from stone and timber. Clara had expected something impressive. Colton's warnings had prepared her for that much, but nothing could have prepared her for the sheer scale of what lay before them as they crested the final ridge. The main house sprawled across the valley floor, 3 stories of dark wood and river stone, with wide porches that wrapped around every level. Behind it stretched barns bigger than the entire Hale estate, corrals that seemed to go on forever, and pastures dotted with more cattle than Clara had ever seen in one place. This wasn't a ranch. It was an empire. Still time to run, Colton said quietly beside her. But his voice held no humor. Clara's hands tightened on the reins. Her back ached from 2 days of hard riding. Her clothes were stiff with dust and sweat, and every part of her screamed that she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. But she'd burned her bridges. There was nowhere to run to. Let's get this over with, she said. They rode down the long approach road, and Clara felt eyes tracking them from every direction. Ranch hands paused in their work to stare. A woman hanging laundry let the sheets fall back into the basket. Even the horses in the near corral seemed to turn and watch as they passed. The prodigal son had returned, and he'd brought the wrong woman with him. Colton dismounted first, then moved to help Clara down. His hands on her waist were steady, but she could feel the tension in him, coiled tight like a spring about to snap. "Remember," he said softly, so only she could hear. "Whatever my father says, whatever he does, you don't owe him politeness. You don't owe him anything." Before Clara could respond, the front door of the main house swung open with enough force to crack against the wall. Victor Mercer stood in the doorway like an Old Testament prophet carved from leather and iron. He was shorter than Clara expected, barely taller than she was, but he radiated power the way a furnace radiated heat. His hair was steel gray, his face all hard angles and deep lines, and his eyes were the same shade of gray as Colton's, but colder, calculating, utterly merciless. "You're late," Victor said. His voice carried across the yard without him raising it. "I expected you 3 days ago." "We took our time," Colton replied. He didn't move toward his father, didn't show any of the deference a son might normally show. "Had some business to attend to." "Business." Victor's gaze slid to Clara, and she felt it like a physical touch, invasive, dissecting, finding every flaw and weakness. "This is your business? Some ranch girl in a second-hand dress?" "This," Colton said, and his voice went hard as iron, "is Clara Hale, my fiancée." The word landed like a bomb in the quiet yard. For a moment, Victor didn't move, didn't blink. Then his mouth curved into something that might have been a smile on a warmer man, but looked predatory on him. "No," he said simply. "I wasn't asking permission." "Then let me be clearer." Victor descended the porch steps with the deliberate pace of a man used to being obeyed. "You will not marry this girl. You will return her to whatever dusty corner you found her in, and you will complete the arrangement I made with Judge Morrison. Those are not requests, Colton. They are facts." "The only fact," Colton said, and Clara heard something dangerous creeping into his voice, "is that I'm marrying Clara. You can accept it, or you can fight it, but you can't stop it." Victor's eyes narrowed. "Can't I?" He turned to Clara then, really looked at her for the first time, and she understood why men feared this man. There was no warmth in that gaze, no humanity, just cold assessment, like a butcher sizing up a carcass. "What's your family name, girl?" Clara lifted her chin. "Hale, sir." "Hale." Victor rolled the name around like a bad taste. "Edmund Hale's daughter? The bankrupt drunk with the falling down ranch and delusions of grandeur?" Heat flooded Clara's face, but she kept her voice steady. "That's the one." "And he sent you to seduce my son?" "Clever, I suppose, certainly more cunning than I gave him credit for." "He didn't send me anywhere," Clara said. "I chose to come." Victor laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You chose? That's rich. Let me tell you what you chose, Miss Hale. You chose to leave poverty for the illusion of wealth. You chose to trade one master for another. You chose to climb above your station by spreading your legs for the first rich man who looked at you twice." "Father," Colton started forward, his hand dropping to where a gun would hang if he'd been wearing one. "No." Clara put a hand on Colton's arm, stopping him. She kept her eyes on Victor. "Let him finish. I want to hear it all." Victor's eyebrows rose slightly. "Brave. Stupid, but brave. Fine. You want the truth? You're nothing. A nobody from a nothing family. With no education, no refinement, no connections worth having. You can't help this ranch, can't help my son, can't help anyone. You're dead weight wearing a dress, and the moment Colton wakes up and realizes what a colossal mistake he's made, you'll be back in whatever hovel you crawled out of." The words hit like fists. Each one was designed to hurt, to humiliate, to break her down. Clara had heard similar words her whole life, but never delivered with such surgical precision, such absolute certainty. But she'd also heard them so many times they'd lost their power. "Are you finished?" Clara asked quietly. Victor blinked. "Excuse me?" "I asked if you were finished." Clara took a step forward. "Because if you are, I'd like to respond." "There's nothing to respond to. These are facts." "Then here are some more facts." Clara's voice was steady, even though her heart was hammering. "You're right. I'm nobody. My family's broke. I have no education, no refinement, nothing that makes me suitable for your son by society's standards. But I can ride, rope, brand, and break horses. I can mend fences, birth calves, and read weather. I can work 16 hours without stopping and be up before dawn to do it again. I don't know French or piano, but I know how to survive. And if you think that makes me worthless, then you don't know half as much about ranching as you think you do." Something flickered in Victor's eyes, surprise maybe, or anger. "Spirited. Colton, you found yourself a spirited mare. Too bad Spirit doesn't pay bills or win political influence." "But it keeps ranches running," Clara shot back, "which is more than your political influence will do when your cattle start dying because nobody's doing the actual work." The yard had gone completely silent. Clara could see ranch hands frozen in place, watching this confrontation with wide eyes. Nobody spoke to Victor Mercer this way. Nobody challenged him on his own land. Victor studied her for a long moment, and Clara had the uncomfortable feeling of being reappraised. Then he turned to Colton. "She's got teeth. I'll give her that." His voice was thoughtful now, calculating. "But teeth without breeding are just another problem. You want to marry her? Fine. Bring her to dinner tonight. We'll see how she handles herself at a table before I make my final decision." "This isn't your decision to make," Colton said. "Everything that happens on this ranch is my decision," Victor replied. "Until I'm dead, boy. You'd do well to remember that." He looked at Clara again. "Dinner's at 7. Don't be late. And for the love of everything, find her something decent to wear. She looks like a stable hand." He turned and walked back into the house, leaving them standing in the dusty yard. Clara let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her hands were shaking from anger or fear or adrenaline, she couldn't tell. "Well," Colton said quietly, "that went about as badly as I expected. That was him being reasonable? That was him showing restraint." Colton's jaw was tight. "He didn't outright forbid it, which means he's planning something. Probably thinks he can break you between now and dinner." "Can he?" Colton looked at her, and something in his expression softened. "Most people would have run screaming after that." "I've been called worse," Clara said. "At least he was creative about it." Colton laughed, but it sounded strained. "Come on, let me show you to your room before he thinks of something else." The inside of the main house was even more impressive than the exterior: polished wood floors, high ceilings, furniture that probably cost more than the Hale estate's remaining cattle. A woman in a severe black dress appeared as they entered, her face carefully neutral. "Mrs. Chen," Colton said. "This is Clara Hale. She'll need a room prepared, and we'll need to find her something appropriate for dinner." Mrs. Chen's eyes flicked over Clara, and her expression didn't change, but Clara saw the judgment there anyway. "Of course, Mr. Colton. I'll have the blue room made up." "Not the blue room," Colton said. "The room next to mine." Mrs. Chen's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Sir, that's highly irregular." "She's going to be my wife," Colton interrupted. "I want her close. Is that a problem?" "No, sir." But her tone suggested it very much was a problem, just not one she could voice. The room Colton led her to was larger than her entire bedroom at the Hale estate. A massive 4-poster bed dominated one wall, with curtains that probably cost more than Clara had earned in her entire life. There was a wardrobe, a writing desk, a washstand with an actual porcelain basin, and windows that overlooked the valley. "It's too much," Clara said quietly. "It's yours." Colton moved to the window. "Mrs. Chen will bring you water for washing and find you something to wear. I need to check in with the foreman, make sure nothing burned down while I was gone, literally or figuratively." "Colton." Clara waited until he turned. "Thank you for defending me to your father." "I didn't do it for you," Colton said. "I did it for me. Every time I stand up to him, it gets a little easier to remember I'm not his puppet." He paused, though watching you call him out on his ranch knowledge was satisfying as hell. After he left, Clara sank onto the bed and let herself shake. The mattress was so soft she almost sank into it, nothing like the thin, straw-filled pallet she'd slept on her whole life. Everything in this room was soft, expensive, carefully chosen. She didn't belong here. Victor was right about that much. But she was here anyway, and she'd be damned if she let him break her on the first day. Mrs. Chen returned an hour later with a copper tub, steaming water, and a dress draped over her arm. "Mr. Victor's orders," she said, setting the dress on the bed. "You're to wear this to dinner." Clara looked at the dress and her stomach sank. It was beautiful, deep emerald silk with black lace trim, the kind of gown that belonged in a ballroom, not a ranch house. It was also at least 2 sizes too small. "This won't fit me," Clara said. "No," Mrs. Chen agreed. "It won't." The realization hit like cold water. He did this on purpose. Mr. Victor doesn't do anything by accident. Mrs. Chen's expression was unreadable. "I can try to let it out, but there's not enough time before dinner. Then I'll wear what I have. He'll use that against you." "He'll use anything against me," Clara said. "At least this way, I'm choosing the battlefield." Something shifted in Mrs. Chen's expression. Not quite approval, but close. "I'll bring your water. If you need anything else, ring the bell." Clara bathed in water that was actually hot, scrubbing away 2 days of trail dust. She washed her hair with soap that smelled like lavender and let herself have 5 minutes of feeling almost human again. Then she pulled on the least damaged of her 2 dresses. The gray one, mended so many times the stitches showed like scars. When she looked in the mirror, she saw exactly what Victor saw. A plain ranch girl in a poor dress, completely out of place in this grand house. But she also saw something else. She saw a woman who'd chosen to be here, who'd walked away from everything she knew for a chance at something better, who'd stood in the dust and told one of the most powerful men in Montana that he was wrong. That woman, Clara thought, might just survive this. Dinner was served in a dining room that could have seated 20. Instead, there were only 4 places set, Victor at the head of the table, Colton to his right, and 2 other seats that remained empty until Clara entered. Victor's eyes swept over her gray dress, and his mouth curved into a satisfied smile. "I see you chose not to wear the dress I provided." "I chose not to wear a dress that didn't fit," Clara corrected, taking her seat across from Colton. "Though I appreciate the thought." "Do you?" Victor's smile widened. "I wonder." The 4th seat remained empty until a woman swept into the room, tall, elegant, dripping with jewelry and entitlement. She was maybe 40, with blonde hair piled in an elaborate style, and a dress that probably cost more than most people earned in a year. "Victor, darling, I'm sorry I'm late. The roads were simply dreadful, and—" She stopped, seeing Clara. "Oh, you have guests." "Margaret Morrison," Victor said smoothly. "Allow me to introduce Clara Hale, Colton's fiancée." The way he said the word made it sound like a joke. Margaret's eyes went wide, then narrow. "I see. How unexpected." She took her seat with exaggerated grace. "I thought you were courting my niece, Colton. Did that arrangement fall through?" "That arrangement was never mine to make," Colton said flatly. "How modern." Margaret's smile was sharp. "And tell me, Miss Hale, what family are you from?" "I don't recognize the name." "The broke one," Clara said before Victor could. "Edmund Hale's daughter. We have a failing ranch about 50 miles east." "Oh," Margaret's tone dripped with false sympathy. "How rustic. And what brought you to the Mercer Ranch?" "Your nephew," Clara said. "He asked me to marry him." "How romantic." Margaret turned to Victor. "Really, Victor, I didn't know Colton had such democratic tastes." The dinner was served by silent servants, course after course of food that would have fed the Hale household for a week. Clara watched the others to see which fork to use, which glass to drink from, navigating the meal like a minefield. Every movement felt wrong, clumsy, obvious. Victor watched her struggle with visible satisfaction. "So, Miss Hale," he said during the soup course, "tell us about your education. Where did you study?" "I didn't." Clara met his eyes. "I learned to read at home. Everything else I learned on the ranch." "How practical," Margaret chimed in. "Can you play any instruments, sing, paint perhaps?" "No." "Speak any languages?" "Just English." "Fascinating." Margaret took a delicate sip of wine. "And what exactly do you bring to this union, besides your charming honesty, of course?" Clara set down her spoon carefully. "I bring work, real work, the kind that keeps ranches running when pretty words and social connections aren't enough." "How utterly provincial," Margaret murmured. "Perhaps," Clara said. "But provincial girls know how to survive when the fancy ones are still waiting for servants to help them." Colton choked on his wine. Victor's eyes gleamed with something that might have been amusement or might have been calculation. "Tell me, Miss Hale," Victor said. "What do you know about running a ranch this size?" "Nothing," Clara admitted. "But I know about work. I know you can't build anything lasting without people willing to do the hard jobs. And I know that empires built on pretty faces and political favors tend to collapse the moment real trouble arrives." "And what would you know about real trouble?" Margaret asked sweetly. "I know what it's like to watch everything fall apart while the people in charge pretend it's fine," Clara said. "I know what it's like to hold things together with nothing but will and work. And I know that when trouble comes, real trouble, not the kind you can bribe or charm away, you need people who can stand in the fire without breaking." Victor leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You've got a mouth on you, girl. That'll get you in trouble." "I've been in trouble my whole life," Claire said. "At least this time I chose it." Something in the air shifted. Victor's expression changed, not softening exactly, but recalibrating, like he was seeing her differently. "Mrs. Chen," he called. The housekeeper appeared from the shadows. "Clear these dishes. Bring the brandy." He looked at Clara. "You ride?" "Yes, sir." "Tomorrow morning, dawn. I want to see what kind of rider Colton brought home." It wasn't a request. "We'll take the North Pasture run, 12 miles, rough terrain. If you can't keep up, you can pack your bags before lunch." "Father," Colton started. "Let her answer," Victor interrupted. Clara met his eyes. "What time's dawn?" Victor smiled, genuinely smiled, for the first time since she'd arrived. 5:30. Don't be late." The rest of the dinner passed in tense silence, Margaret shooting poisonous looks at Clara, while Victor seemed almost amused by the whole situation. When they finally retired, Colton followed Clara out into the hallway. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "The ride tomorrow. It's a test designed to humiliate you." "Everything here is designed to humiliate me," Clara said. "At least this is something I can actually do." "The North Pasture run is brutal. Experienced riders struggle with it." "Then I'll struggle with them." Clara looked at him. "I'm not running, Colton. Not from your father, not from this ranch, not from anything. If he wants to break me, he's going to have to work for it." Colton's expression shifted into something Clara couldn't quite read. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met, or the most reckless." "Can't I be both?" He laughed, surprised and genuine. "Yeah, I guess you can." That night, Clara lay in the too-soft bed staring at the ceiling. Through the walls, she could hear the house settling, voices murmuring in distant rooms, the sound of boots on wood floors. The Mercer Ranch was alive in a way the Hale estate had never been, full of people and purpose and power. And tomorrow, she'd have to prove she belonged here, or die trying. She was up before dawn, dressed in her work clothes, her hair braided tight. Mrs. Chen had left riding boots outside her door, good ones, properly broken in, and Clara didn't let herself think about whether that was kindness or more manipulation. Victor was already in the stable yard when she arrived, sitting his horse like he'd been born in the saddle. The animal was huge, a black gelding that looked like it could run all day without tiring. Beside him, a stable hand held the reins of a smaller mare, chestnut, nervous, dancing sideways. "That's yours," Victor said, nodding at the mare. "She's green. Spook's easy. You'll have to work for every step." Of course he'd given her a difficult horse. Clara moved to the mare slowly, letting the animal smell her, speaking low and steady. The mare's ears flicked forward, uncertain, but listening. Clara swung into the saddle, and the mare immediately tried to sidestep. Clara sat deep, hands steady, and after a moment the mare settled. Victor's eyebrows rose fractionally. "You handle her well. I've handled worse. We'll see." He turned his horse toward the trail. "Try to keep up." The North Pasture run was exactly as brutal as Colton had warned. They rode hard from the start, Victor pushing the pace until Clara's thighs burned and her lungs ached. The trail wound through rocky terrain, up steep inclines and down slopes that made the mare scramble for footing. Twice, Clara almost lost her seat. 3 times, the mare tried to balk at a jump. But Clara had spent years riding half-broke horses on failing equipment, and she knew how to survive. She gripped with her knees, trusted her balance, and refused to let fear show. Victor said nothing, just kept riding, kept pushing, kept testing. They crested a ridge just as the sun broke the horizon, painting the valley in gold and shadow. Victor finally slowed, letting the horses breathe. "Not bad," he said. It might have been the closest thing to praise he was capable of. "You sit a horse better than most men I know." "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet." Victor turned to face her fully. That was the easy part. Riding is one thing. Surviving this ranch is another. You think you can handle it? The politics, the danger, the men who'll see you as nothing but Colton's whore? Clara's hands tightened on the reins. "I've survived worse than gossip." "Have you survived bullets?" Victor's voice went cold. "Because we've had 3 attempts on Colton's life in the last 6 months. Neighboring ranchers who want us gone, business rivals who'd rather see us dead than successful. You marry my son, you become a target. Then I'll learn to shoot back." Victor laughed, genuinely laughed. "You've got spine, I'll give you that. But spine doesn't stop a bullet, and it doesn't win political wars. Colton needs a wife who can do more than ride and talk back." "What does he need?" "Power, connections, someone who can open doors instead of just kicking them down." Victor's eyes bored into her. "That Morrison woman's niece? She's vapid and cruel, but her uncle controls the courts. Marrying her would give Colton legal protection, political leverage, the kind of power you can't build with hard work." "And what would it give Colton personally?" Clara asked quietly. "Besides a lifetime of misery?" Victor's expression flickered. "Survival. In this world, girl, that's all that matters." "No," Clara said. "It's not." They stared at each other across the windswept ridge. 2 people from completely different worlds, both convinced they were right. Finally, Victor turned his horse back toward the ranch. "You're wrong. But you're brave enough to be wrong out loud. That's something." He paused. "Dinner tonight. Just the 3 of us. We'll talk terms." "Terms?" "For your marriage." Victor glanced back at her. "I'm not a fool, Miss Hale. Colton's chosen you, and short of locking you both in separate rooms, I can't stop it. But I can make sure this union actually benefits the ranch. So we'll negotiate. Like civilized people." Clara watched him ride away, her heart hammering. She'd passed the test, but she had a feeling the real battle was just beginning. When she returned to the stable yard, Colton was waiting. He took one look at her, sweating, exhausted, still mounted on the skittish mare, and his expression shifted into something like relief. "You made it." "Barely." Clara dismounted on shaking legs. "Your father's insane." "I told you that yesterday." "No, you said he was hard. There's a difference." Clara handed off the mare to a stable hand. "He wants to negotiate terms for our marriage." Colton went very still. "When?" "Tonight. Dinner. Just us 3. Clara looked at him. "What's he planning?" "I don't know." But Colton's voice was tight. "But whatever it is, we face it together. Agreed?" Clara thought about the ride she'd just survived, about Victor's cold calculations and Margaret Morrison's poisonous smiles. She thought about the empire she'd walked into and the man who'd built it through ruthlessness and blood. And she thought about Colton, who'd offered her a choice when she'd had none. "Agreed," she said. The day passed in a blur. Clara washed, changed, tried to prepare herself for whatever was coming. Mrs. Chen brought her a different dress, simpler than the emerald silk, but well made, and crucially, it fit. Clara didn't ask questions, just accepted the kindness and tried not to read too much into it. Dinner that night was held in Victor's private study, not the formal dining room. Just 3 place settings and a table covered in maps, ledgers, and legal documents. Victor poured whiskey for himself and Colton, water for Clara, and settled into his chair like a general before a war council. "Let's be frank," he said. "I don't want this marriage. You're not what I chose for my son, Miss Hale, and I think you'll be a liability more than an asset. But Colton's made his choice, and I'm a practical man. So instead of fighting it, I'm going to make sure it works in my favor." "How generous," Clara said dryly. Victor's mouth quirked. "Here are my terms. You marry Colton, you become part of this ranch. That means you work. Real work. Not playing at being a rancher's wife. You prove your value through results, not charm." "That suits me fine." "I'm not finished." Victor leaned forward. "You will also learn everything I teach you about running this operation. The business side, the politics, the dirty work. Because when I'm gone, this ranch will need someone who can think as well as ride. And right now my son thinks with his heart too much and his head too little. Colton's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. In exchange, Victor continued, I'll give you my blessing, public support, access to resources, and I won't sabotage you the way I could. And if I refuse? Clara asked. Then you marry Colton anyway, but you do it as an enemy of this ranch. Every door will be closed, every advantage withheld. You'll have his name, but you'll have nothing else. Victor's eyes were cold. Choose carefully, Miss Hale, because this offer won't come twice. Clara looked at Colton. He met her eyes, and she saw fear there, not of his father, but for her. He was terrified Victor would break her, that she'd take the easy road and run. Clara turned back to Victor. I accept your terms, with one addition. Victor's eyebrows rose. Bold, let's hear it. You teach me everything you promised. Business, politics, strategy, but you teach me honestly. No sabotage, no setting me up to fail. If I'm going to prove my value, I need a fair chance to do it. And if you fail anyway, then you'll have earned the right to say I told you so. Clara met his stare. But I won't fail. Victor studied her for a long moment. Then he stood, extending his hand across the table. Done. Clara shook it and felt the trap close around her. But it was a trap of her own choosing, and that made all the difference. As they left the study, Colton caught her arm. You didn't have to agree to that. Yes, I did. Clara looked up at him. Your father's right about one thing. I need to prove I belong here. Not to him, but to myself. And if you can't? Clara smiled. Then I'll die trying, just like everything else in my life. Colton shook his head, but he was smiling too. You're going to give me a heart attack. Probably. They stood in the dim hallway, and Clara felt the weight of what she'd just committed to settling over her like a yoke. She'd agreed to be molded by Victor Mercer, to learn from one of the most ruthless men in Montana, to become something more than the broken ranch girl who'd ridden away from the Hale estate. It should have terrified her. Instead, for the first time since arriving at the Mercer Ranch, Clara felt something like hope. She'd found her battlefield. Now she just had to survive it. Victor kept his word, which surprised Clara more than anything else that first month at the Mercer Ranch. Every morning at dawn, she rode out with Colton and the hands, learning the rhythm of the operation, where the water sources were, which pastures rotated when, how to spot sick cattle before they infected the herd. Her body ached constantly those first weeks, muscles she didn't know she had screaming in protest. But she pushed through it, refusing to show weakness, refusing to give Victor any reason to say she wasn't strong enough. Every afternoon, Victor summoned her to his office and taught her the Empire's darker machinery. Contracts written to favor the Mercer interests, political connections maintained through careful gifts and veiled threats, water rights secured through legal manipulation that skirted the edge of fraud. He showed her everything with clinical precision, watching her face for signs of moral outrage or weakness. Clara gave him neither. She listened, learned, and asked sharp questions that sometimes made Victor's mouth quirk in something almost like approval. You're smarter than I expected, he said one afternoon, 3 weeks into her education. They were reviewing expansion plans, maps spread across his desk showing neighboring ranches marked in red. Most people can't see past the surface. You see the patterns. My father taught me that much, Clara said. How to recognize when someone's lying about their real intentions. Edmund Hale couldn't recognize a lie if it bit him. Victor's voice was dismissive. He's a fool who inherited wealth and squandered it on pride. He's also the reason I know how to spot a failing operation. Clara met Victor's eyes. Like these expansion plans. The room went very quiet. Explain, Victor said softly. The word was a warning. Clara pointed to the maps. You're trying to acquire 6 ranches simultaneously. That means negotiating with 6 different owners, managing 6 different legal battles, and absorbing 6 operations all at once. Even with your resources, that's going to strain everything: cash flow, personnel, political capital. And if even one of those acquisitions goes wrong, it could destabilize the entire expansion. You think I haven't considered that? I think you're dying, Clara said bluntly, and you're trying to build your legacy before you run out of time. But empires built too fast collapse. I watched it happen with my own family. Victor's face went hard. For a moment, Clara thought she'd pushed too far, that he'd throw her out, or worse. Then he laughed, genuinely laughed. "You've got more balls than my son," he said. "Fine. You think you're so smart, what would you do differently?" Clara studied the maps, her mind racing. "Pick 3 targets, not 6. The ones that give you the most strategic value. Water access, timber rights, and one that connects your current holdings. Negotiate those hard, but fair. Give the owners something they actually want instead of just crushing them. Build loyalty instead of resentment. Loyalty is expensive. So is fighting 6 different ranch wars at once." Clara looked up at him. "You've built this empire through force. Maybe it's time to try building through respect." Victor was quiet for a long moment. Then he rolled up the maps with sharp, decisive movements. "We'll discuss this further. You're dismissed." Clara left the office uncertain whether she'd won ground or lost it. But that night at dinner, Victor announced they'd be scaling back the expansion to focus on key acquisitions, and Colton's eyes found hers across the table with something like wonder. The ranch hands were harder to win over than Victor. They watched Clara with suspicion and barely concealed resentment. This outsider who'd somehow caught the boss's son, who thought she could just waltz in and tell them how to do their jobs. The foreman, a grizzled man named Jack Thornton, made his opinions clear the first time Clara tried to help with a difficult calving. "This ain't work for a lady," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Why don't you go back to the house, Miss Hale? Let the men handle it." Clara had looked at the struggling heifer, at the calf's hooves just visible and positioned wrong, at the men standing around uncertain. Then she'd rolled up her sleeves and knelt in the mud. "The calf's breech," she said. "You need to push it back in, turn it, then pull it through. Otherwise you'll lose them both." "I know what needs doing," Jack snapped. "I've been birthing calves since before you were born." "Then why aren't you doing it?" Clara met his stare. "Pride kill more cattle than ignorance, Mr. Thornton. Now either help me or get out of my way." She'd turned the calf herself, ignoring the men's shocked stares, working with hands that knew this job even if they didn't know this ranch. When the calf finally slipped free, slick and gasping, and the heifer struggled to her feet to start cleaning it, Jack had made a sound that might have been grudging respect. "Not bad," he'd muttered, "for a lady." "Not bad for anyone," Clara had corrected. Then she'd stood, covered in blood and birth fluids, and walked back to the house with her head high. After that, the men stopped suggesting she go back to the house. They didn't exactly welcome her, but they stopped treating her like decoration. It was progress. Colton found her that evening on the porch, watching the sun set over the valley. He sat beside her without speaking, and they stayed that way for a while, comfortable in the silence. "You're making enemies," he said finally. "I've had enemies my whole life." "Not like this." Colton's voice was troubled. "The Morrison woman's been spreading stories. That you seduced me for money. That you're a fortune hunter from a bankrupt family. That you're not fit to be seen in polite society." Clara laughed softly. "She's not wrong about most of that." "Clara, I don't care what Margaret Morrison thinks of me," Clara interrupted. "She's bitter because her niece lost what she never really had. Let her talk." "It's not just talk. She's poisoning the well with every rancher's wife in the county. When we finally do get married, you're going to be walking into rooms where everyone's already decided you're trash." "Then I'll change their minds." Clara looked at him. "Or I won't. Either way, I didn't come here to make friends at tea parties." Colton shook his head, but he was smiling. "You're impossible. You chose me." "Best decision I ever made," he said quietly. Then more hesitant, "How are you really doing with all of this?" Clara considered the question honestly. The truth was complicated. She was exhausted, challenged, pushed past every limit she thought she had. Victor's lessons were brutal, the ranch work was unrelenting, and she fell into bed each night so tired she couldn't think. But underneath all of that was something else. "I'm alive," she said finally. "For the first time in my life, I'm actually alive. Does that make sense?" "Yeah," Colton said. "It does." They sat together as the stars came out, and Clara let herself believe, just for a moment, that maybe she really could build a life here. The explosion came on a Tuesday morning, 4 weeks after Clara's arrival. She was in the barn checking tack when she heard the shouting. Men's voices raised in alarm, the sound of horses being driven hard. She ran outside to find the yard in chaos. 3 riders had just thundered in, their horses lathered and wild-eyed. "Fire!" one of them shouted. "The north timber stand! Someone set it!" Victor appeared on the porch, fully dressed despite the early hour. "How bad?" "Bad, sir. Wind's driving it toward the Quinn property. If it jumps their fence line, get every able man mounted." Victor cut him off. "We need to cut a fire break before it spreads. Move." The ranch exploded into controlled chaos. Men ran for horses, for tools, for water barrels. Clara started toward the house to stay out of the way, but Colton caught her arm. "Can you ride hard?" he asked. "You know I can." "Then saddle up. We need every hand we can get." 20 minutes later, Clara was riding hell-bent toward the northern boundary, part of a group of 30 men racing to stop a fire that could destroy everything. The smell of smoke grew stronger as they got closer, and when they crested the ridge, Clara saw the inferno. Flames climbed through the timber stand like living things, devouring trees that had stood for 100 years. The wind drove the fire east, directly toward the Quinn Ranch, their closest neighbor and, according to Victor's lessons, one of his most vocal opponents. "We cut the break here," Victor shouted over the roar of the flames. 20 yards wide, down to bare earth. If the fire crosses it, we've lost both ranches. Move!" They worked like demons, cutting trees and dragging them clear, digging up brush and grass until their hands bled. The smoke was so thick Clara could barely breathe, and the heat made the air shimmer. But she kept working, kept digging, because stopping meant death. Beside her, Colton swung an axe with brutal efficiency. Sweat poured down his face, and his shirt was black with soot, but he didn't slow down. "This wasn't an accident," he said between swings. "Someone set this deliberately." "Who?" "Take your pick. We've got a dozen enemies who'd love to see us burn." He paused, looking toward the Quinn property. "But whoever it was, they're trying to make it look like we did it. If that fire crosses onto Quinn land, he'll think we're trying to drive him out." Clara understood immediately. "And he'll retaliate. With bullets, probably." Colton's jaw tightened. "We stop this fire. We might stop a war." They worked for 3 hours straight, until the fire break was finished, and they could only wait to see if it would hold. The fire reached the break and paused, flames licking at the edge like a living thing testing a barrier. Then the wind shifted. The flames turned back on themselves, and slowly, agonizingly, the fire began to die. Men sagged where they stood, exhausted and grateful. They'd done it. But Clara's attention had caught on something else. Through the smoke, she could see riders approaching from the Quinn property, a dozen men, all armed, led by a gray-haired man on a paint horse. "That's Thomas Quinn," Colton said quietly, "and he looks ready for blood." Quinn pulled up 20 yards from where Victor stood, his hand resting on his gun. His men fanned out behind him, and Clara saw several of the Mercer hands reaching for their own weapons. "You son of a bitch," Quinn said, his voice carrying across the scorched earth. "You tried to burn me out." "Don't be a fool, Thomas," Victor replied. "Why would I burn my own timber to get to you?" "Because you're desperate. Because you're dying and you want my land before you go." Quinn's face was twisted with rage. "I warned you, Mercer. I warned you I wouldn't be pushed out like the others, and now you've gone too far." "We didn't set this fire," Colton said, stepping forward. "Someone's trying to set us against each other." "Convenient story." Quinn's eyes were hard. "You Mercers think you can take whatever you want. Well, not this time. You want my land? You'll have to kill me for it." The tension ratcheted up another notch. Men on both sides shifted, hands moving toward weapons. Clara could see the disaster unfolding. One wrong word, one nervous trigger finger, and people would die. She stepped forward before she could think better of it. "Mr. Quinn," she said clearly. "My name is Clara Hale. I'm new to this ranch, so maybe I'm missing something. But it seems to me that if the Mercers wanted to drive you out, burning their own valuable timber is a stupid way to do it." Quinn's eyes narrowed. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone with no stake in your feud," Clara said, "which means I can see what you're both missing. Someone set this fire to make you fight each other. Someone who benefits from both ranches being weak." And if you kill each other over it, they win. She's right, Victor said. It might have been the first time he'd publicly supported her. This fire started on my land, Thomas, but it was aimed at both of us. Think, who else wants this territory? Quinn hesitated, and Clara saw doubt creeping into his expression. The mining consortium, he said slowly. They've been sniffing around my northern boundary for months, said they wanted to negotiate for mineral rights. They approached me too, Victor said, offered me a fortune to sell. When I refused, they threatened to take it anyway. He paused. If we're busy killing each other, we can't fight them. The silence stretched taut. Then Quinn took his hand off his gun. If I find out you're lying to me, Mercer, there won't be enough men or guns to save you. Same goes, Victor replied. But right now, we've got a bigger enemy. Quinn looked at Clara, really looked at her. You Mercer's new wife? Not yet, Clara said, but soon. You've got more sense than any Mercer I've met, Quinn said. Then he turned his horse. We'll talk tomorrow, neutral ground, about the consortium and about staying out of each other's way. He paused. And Mercer? You owe your future daughter-in-law a debt. She just saved both our lives. After Quinn and his men rode off, Victor turned to Clara. His expression was unreadable. That was either very brave or very stupid, he said. Probably both, Clara replied. Her legs were shaking now that the danger had passed. Did I overstep? You stopped a war. Victor's voice was grudging. I'll allow it. Colton caught Clara as her knees buckled, exhaustion and fear finally catching up with her. You're insane, he said, but he was smiling, stepping between two armed groups ready to shoot each other. Someone had to, Clara said, and I figured they were less likely to shoot a woman. Bad assumption, Colton said, but it worked. They rode back to the ranch in weary silence, and Clara let the reality of what she'd just done sink in. She'd stepped into the middle of a range war and somehow convinced both sides to step back. She'd proven her value not through riding or working, but through thinking clearly when everyone else was ready to kill. Maybe, she thought, she was finally starting to understand this world. But the reprieve was short-lived. Clara had just finished washing the soot from her skin when Mrs. Chen knocked on her door, her face carefully neutral. You have a visitor, Miss Hale. In the parlor. Who is it? Your father. Clara's blood went cold. Edmund Hale stood in the Mercer parlor like a prophet in enemy territory. His good suit brushed clean, his face set in lines of righteous fury. Behind him, looking pale and miserable, was Vivian. Clara, Edmund said. His voice was hard. We need to talk. Clara descended the stairs slowly, buying time to think. Victor and Colton appeared from different parts of the house, drawn by the commotion. Mr. Hale, Victor said with cold politeness, this is unexpected. I'm here for my daughter, Edmund said. He didn't look at Victor, only at Clara. You've had your adventure, Clara, made your point. Now it's time to come home and stop this foolishness. I am home, Clara said quietly. You're in a stranger's house, pretending to be something you're not. Edmund's voice rose. Do you have any idea what you've done? The shame you've brought on our family, the opportunities you've destroyed? The only opportunity I destroyed was Vivian's chance to be sold like cattle, Clara shot back, and I'd do it again. Vivian made a small sound, and Clara saw tears on her sister's face. But there was something else there too, something that looked almost like relief. You selfish, ungrateful... Edmund started forward, his hand rising. Colton stepped between them, his voice deadly quiet. Touch her, and we'll have a problem, Mr. Hale. Edmund stopped, but his rage didn't diminish. You think you're so clever, both of you. But I know what this is. It's revenge. Clara's revenge for all those years of being second best. And your revenge on your father for trying to control you. He pointed at Colton. You're using each other. And when that's not enough anymore, this whole charade will collapse. Is that what you came here to say? Clara asked. I came here to offer you one last chance. Edmund's voice shook. Come home. Apologize. Convince Mr. Mercer to court your sister instead. Fix what you've broken. No. Then I'm done with you. Edmund turned to Vivian. Tell her. Vivian looked at Clara and her eyes were red from crying. Father arranged a marriage for me to Harold Westbrook. Clara's stomach dropped. She knew that name. Everyone in Montana knew that name. Harold Westbrook was 60 years old, wealthy beyond measure, and on his third wife. The first two had died under suspicious circumstances. "You can't," Clara whispered. "Father, you can't give her to that man." "I can and I will," Edmund said coldly. "Someone has to save this family, and since you've abandoned us, Vivian will have to do. The wedding is set for 2 weeks from now, unless you come home and make this right." It was blackmail, pure, calculated blackmail. Clara looked at Vivian and saw terror behind her sister's tears. "Don't do this," Clara said. "Please. She's your daughter." "So were you," Edmund replied, "and you threw that away. Now Vivian pays the price for your selfishness, unless you fix it." "How?" Clara's voice was shaking. "How do I fix it?" "Convince Mr. Mercer here to court Vivian, publicly. Announce that you made a mistake, that you misunderstood his intentions. Step aside gracefully." Edmund's eyes were pitiless. "Save your sister, Clara. It's the least you owe her." The room was silent. Clara felt every eye on her, felt the weight of the impossible choice crushing down. Then Victor spoke, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "No." Edmund turned to him. "Excuse me?" "I said no." Victor's expression was carved from ice. "My son chose Clara. That decision stands. And if you think you can manipulate us by sacrificing your other daughter, you're more of a fool than I thought." "You don't understand," Edmund started. "I understand perfectly. You're a bankrupt coward trying to sell his daughters to pay his debts. And you're using guilt to try to force Clara back into her cage." Victor's voice was contemptuous. "It won't work. She's ours now, and we protect what's ours." Clara's breath caught. Victor had just claimed her as family, publicly, in front of her father. "Then Vivian's fate is on your heads," Edmund said. He grabbed Vivian's arm. "Come, we're leaving." "Wait," Clara said. The word came out stronger than she felt. "Vivian doesn't have to go back." Edmund turned slowly. "What?" "She can stay here," Clara said. She looked at Victor. "Can't she? There's plenty of room. She could—" "Absolutely not," Edmund cut her off. "Vivian is coming home." "Why?" Clara challenged. "So you can hand her over to a man who'll probably kill her? I won't let you do that." "You have no say in this." "I do if she chooses to stay." Clara looked at her sister. "Vivian, you don't have to go with him. You can stay here. Make your own choice." Vivian looked between Clara and their father, her face twisted with indecision and fear. For a moment, Clara thought she might actually choose freedom. Then Vivian shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I can't be like you, Clara. I can't just throw everything away and hope it works out. I'm not that brave." "You are," Clara insisted. "You just don't know it yet." "No." Vivian pulled away from their father's grip, but only to face Clara directly. "You got what you wanted. You got to escape, to be the hero of your own story. But someone has to save the family, and I guess that's me. Vivian, I hope you're happy," Vivian said, her voice breaking. "I hope it was worth it, because I'll be paying for your choices for the rest of my life." She turned and walked out, Edmund following with a final contemptuous look at Clara. The door closed, and Clara stood frozen in the parlor, feeling like she'd been gutted. "She made her choice," Victor said quietly. "You can't save someone who won't save themselves." "She's going to die," Clara whispered. "That man will kill her." "Maybe," Victor said, "but that's her choice to make, not yours." Clara wanted to scream, wanted to ride after them, drag Vivian back by force if necessary. But deep down, she knew Victor was right. Vivian had chosen the cage because it was familiar, because the unknown terrified her more than the known danger. Colton's hand found Clara's, squeezing tight. "We'll watch out for her. Make sure Westbrook doesn't— We'll do what we can." Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. But inside, something had changed. She thought leaving the Hale estate would free her from its poison. Instead, it had just shown her how deep the poison went. She'd escaped. But Vivian was still drowning, and Clara didn't know how to save someone who'd already given up. The next weeks passed in a blur of work and worry. Clara threw herself into ranch operations, trying to outrun the guilt that ate at her every time she thought of Vivian. The meeting with Thomas Quinn led to an uneasy alliance against the mining consortium, and Clara found herself included in the negotiations, Victor's way of acknowledging that she'd earned a place at the table. But underneath everything, the clock was ticking toward Vivian's wedding. 10 days before the ceremony, Margaret Morrison hosted a dinner party, and Victor insisted Clara and Colton attend. "It's time you face society," he said. "You can't hide on the ranch forever. And besides, I want to see Morrison's face when you prove you're not the backwoods idiot he thinks you are." The Morrison house was everything the Mercer Ranch wasn't, all gold leaf and crystal, more interested in appearance than substance. Clara wore a dress Mrs. Chen had altered for her, simple but well made, and she walked into that parlor with her head high. The conversation stopped the moment she entered. Margaret Morrison's smile was poisonous. "Clara, darling, how rustic you look. We were just discussing the Westbrook Hale wedding. Such a tragedy about your sister, isn't it? Marrying that awful man. But I suppose someone has to make sacrifices for family." The barb hit its mark, but Clara kept her expression neutral. "My sister made her choice. I hope it brings her happiness." "How generous." Margaret turned to the other guests, ranchers' wives and businessmen, all watching Clara with barely concealed judgment. "Though one does wonder if she'd have had to make that choice if you hadn't stolen her intended." "I didn't steal anyone," Clara said quietly. "Colton chose me. There's a difference." "Is there?" An older woman in pearls spoke up. "From what I understand, you seduced him during what was meant to be a courtship visit with your sister." "I fixed fences while my sister poured tea," Clara corrected. "If that's seduction, then half the ranch hands in Montana are guilty." A few people laughed, quickly stifled. Margaret's smile went sharp. "How clever. But cleverness doesn't make a proper wife, does it? Tell me, dear, have you learned to play piano yet? Or speak French? Or do any of the accomplishments expected of a woman in your position?" "No," Clara said. "But I've learned to read contracts, manage accounts, and negotiate water rights. I figure those skills will serve the Mercer Ranch better than piano." "How practical." Margaret's tone made it sound like an insult. "But ranching is men's work, dear. A wife's role is to support her husband socially, not to pretend she can do his job." "Why not both?" Clara asked. She was aware of every eye on her, of the trap Margaret was building. "I can support Colton and help run the ranch. Women have been doing both since the frontier opened." "But you're not frontier anymore," Margaret said smoothly. "You're part of established society now, and society has standards, expectations." She turned to Judge Morrison, who sat like a toad on his throne. "Isn't that right, Uncle? We can't have just anyone joining our ranks." Judge Morrison looked at Clara with cold assessment. "Indeed. The question is whether Miss Hale understands what's expected of her, or whether she's simply playing at being something she's not." Clara felt rage building, but she forced it down. Getting angry would only prove their point. Instead, she smiled. "Let me tell you what I understand, Judge. I understand that this ranch is expanding into territory that other ranchers claim. I understand that you've been ruling in favor of those ranchers in every land dispute, which means Victor Mercer is losing ground in court. And I understand that this dinner party isn't about social standards. It's about reminding everyone here that you have the power to destroy the Mercer operation through legal means if Victor doesn't fall in line." The room went dead silent. "How dare you?" Judge Morrison started. "But here's what you don't understand," Clara continued, her voice steady. "Victor Mercer is dying. In a year, maybe less, he'll be gone. And then Colton will inherit everything. Colton, who doesn't care about your political games or your daughter's hurt feelings. Colton, who's going to run this ranch the way he sees fit, with me beside him. So you can make things difficult now, Judge, but you're playing a short game. We're playing a long one." She stood, and Colton stood with her. "Thank you for the dinner, Mrs. Morrison. It was educational." They walked out into the night, and Clara didn't let herself shake until they were in the carriage. "That was either brilliant or catastrophic," Colton said. "I just made an enemy of the most powerful judge in the county," Clara said. "Definitely catastrophic." But when they reached the ranch, Victor was waiting. He'd heard about the confrontation. News traveled fast in their circle. "You called Morrison out in front of witnesses," he said. "That took guts. Stupid guts, but guts." "I'm sorry if I made things harder," Clara started. "Don't be sorry. Be ready." Victor's smile was sharp. "Morrison's going to come at us hard now. Legal challenges, blocked permits, every dirty trick he can manage. But you did something important tonight. You showed everyone watching that you're not afraid. And in this world, fear is the only real currency." 3 days later, the mining consortium made its move. They filed claims on the water rights that fed both the Mercer and Quinn ranches, backed by legal paperwork that Judge Morrison approved within hours. Without those water rights, both operations would slowly die. Victor called an emergency meeting. Him, Colton, Clara, Thomas Quinn, and Quinn's foreman. They gathered in the Mercer study, tension thick enough to cut. "Morrison's making his move," Victor said without preamble. "He's using the consortium to strangle us. If we fight this legally, we'll lose. He controls the courts." "Then we fight another way," Quinn said grimly. "We run them off. Show them this territory doesn't welcome claim jumpers." "That leads to violence," Colton said. "Bloodshed. Maybe people dying. Better than losing everything," Quinn shot back. They argued for an hour, voices rising, tempers flaring. Clara listened to the plans being thrown around: sabotage, intimidation, outright attacks. Every option led to more violence, more death. Finally, she spoke. "What if we don't fight them at all?" Everyone turned to stare. "Explain," Victor said. Clara stood, moving to the map spread across the desk. "The consortium wants our water rights because they need water for mining operations. But they're not miners. They're investors. They don't want to run a mine. They want to profit from one." "So?" Quinn asked. "So we offer them a better investment," Clara said. "The Mercer Ranch has timber. The Quinn Ranch has grazing land. We form a partnership, cut them in for a percentage of timber sales and cattle exports. Guaranteed return, no risk, no need to fight us for water they'd then have to develop at huge cost." Victor leaned back in his chair. "You want to pay them off." "I want to make them partners," Clara corrected. "At a low enough percentage that it doesn't hurt us, but high enough that it's more profitable than mining. And we get Judge Morrison to broker the deal, which gives him credit for resolving the conflict peacefully." "That's surrender," Quinn said. "That's survival," Clara shot back. "We give up a small piece to keep everything else. And we do it in a way that makes Morrison look good, which means he'll stop coming after us." The room was quiet as they processed her proposal. Then Victor started laughing. "You want to turn our enemies into business partners," he said, "and make them grateful for the privilege. That's either genius or insane." "Why can't it be both?" Clara asked. They implemented the plan within the week. Clara helped draft the proposal, making sure the numbers were attractive enough to tempt the consortium, but low enough not to cripple the ranches. Judge Morrison, offered a chance to look like a peacemaker instead of a tyrant, agreed to broker the deal. The consortium accepted. Just like that, the conflict that could have destroyed both ranches evaporated. The water rights stayed where they were, the expansion could continue, and the Mercer-Quinn alliance was strengthened by shared profit. Victor looked at Clara across his desk, and for the first time since she'd arrived, his expression held something like respect. "You saved us," he said simply. "Again." "We saved ourselves," Clara corrected, "together." And for the first time since leaving the Hale estate, Clara felt like she might actually belong here. Like she'd finally found her place in this brutal, beautiful world. Like she'd earned the right to call herself a Mercer. The wedding was set for October, when the Montana air turned crisp and the aspens blazed gold against the mountains. Clara had 2 months to prepare, 2 months to prove she could stand beside Colton not just as his partner in work, but as his wife, in all the ways that mattered to the world watching them. But first, there was Vivian's wedding to endure. Clara stood in her room the morning of her sister's ceremony, staring at the invitation that had arrived 3 days prior. Heavy cream paper, elegant script, all the trappings of respectability wrapped around what Clara knew was a death sentence. "You don't have to go," Colton said from the doorway. He'd been watching her for the past 10 minutes, saying nothing, just being present. "Yes, I do." Clara set the invitation down. "She's still my sister, even if she hates me," She doesn't hate you. She's terrified of being you. The words hit harder than Clara expected, because they were true. Vivian had always been terrified of poverty, of obscurity, of being ordinary, and now she was marrying a monster to avoid becoming what Clara had chosen to be. Free. They rode to the Hale estate in Victor's best carriage, a show of Mercer wealth and power that made Clara uncomfortable. But Victor had insisted. "You left as a servant," he'd said. "You return as a Mercer. Let them see the difference." The Hale estate looked smaller than Clara remembered, more pathetic. The paint was still peeling, the fences still sagging, but now there were carriages in the yard, guests arriving for the spectacle. Edmund had spent money he didn't have to make this wedding look respectable. Clara stepped down from the carriage in a dress that cost more than her father probably made in a year. Heads turned, whispers started. She kept her spine straight and her face neutral as she walked toward the house that had never really been her home. Margaret intercepted them at the door, her smile brittle as glass. "Clara, how generous of you to come. I'm sure Vivian will be touched." "Where is she?" Clara asked. "Getting ready, but I don't think she wants to see you right now." "I don't care what she wants," Clara said quietly. "I need to see her." Margaret's expression hardened. "You've done enough damage to this family. Haven't you caused enough pain? Let her through." Edmund's voice cut across the entry hall. He stood at the top of the stairs, looking older than Clara remembered. Smaller. "5 minutes, Clara, then you leave." Clara climbed the stairs alone, leaving Colton and Victor in the parlor with the other guests. She knew the way to Vivian's room by heart, had walked this path 1,000 times, bringing tea, delivering messages, being invisible. She knocked. "Go away!" Vivian's voice was raw, broken. "It's me," Clara said. Silence. Then the door opened. Vivian stood in her wedding dress, white silk, delicate lace, everything a bride should be. But her face was blotchy from crying, her eyes red and swollen. She looked at Clara and something crumpled in her expression. "Come to gloat?" Vivian asked. "Come to make sure you're all right." "I'm getting married. Of course I'm all right." But Vivian's voice shook. "This is what I was raised for, what Father prepared me for. I should be grateful." Clara stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. "Are you?" Vivian laughed, but it came out as a sob. "He's 63 years old, Clara. He smells like medicine and old cigars. His hands shake when he touches me, and there's something in his eyes that makes my skin crawl. But he's rich, he's respectable, and he's going to save Father from bankruptcy. At what cost?" "At whatever cost it takes." Vivian's voice rose. "Because someone has to save this family. Someone has to be responsible. Not everyone can just run away with the first rich man who looks at them." The anger was familiar, but underneath it Clara heard something else. Fear. Desperation. A last cry for help from someone drowning. "It's not too late," Clara said quietly. "You can still walk away. Come back to the Mercer Ranch with me. Victor will protect you. We both will." "And be what? Your charity case? The failed sister who couldn't even manage to get married?" Vivian shook her head. "No, I'd rather die as Mrs. Harold Westbrook than live as Vivian Hale, the poor relation everyone pities." "You won't just die as his wife," Clara said. "You'll die because of him. His last 2 wives died of natural causes. Illness, accidents." Vivian's voice was flat. "Everyone knows the stories. Everyone knows what he probably is. And I'm marrying him anyway because this is the choice Father gave me. This or nothing." Clara felt something break in her chest. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I couldn't—" "You could have stayed," Vivian interrupted. "You could have married Colton Mercer and convinced him to help Father anyway. You could have saved us all instead of just saving yourself. But you didn't. You chose you. So don't stand there and apologize for consequences you chose to create." The words were knives, each one precisely aimed to wound, and Clara couldn't even argue because part of her knew Vivian was right. She had chosen herself, had saved herself and left her sister to drown. "If you ever need help," Clara said quietly, "if you ever need a way out, come to me. I'll be there." "I won't need you," Vivian said. "I'm going to be exactly what I was raised to be. A perfect wife. A perfect ornament. And when Harold Westbrook finally kills me, at least I'll die as someone instead of as nothing. Clara wanted to shake her, to scream at her, to drag her out of this house by force. But she could see in Vivian's eyes that her sister had already made peace with her fate, had already given up. And you couldn't save someone who'd chosen to surrender. Clara left the room and descended the stairs with tears burning behind her eyes. The ceremony was a blur, Vivian pale and beautiful in her white dress, Harold Westbrook looking satisfied and possessive, Edmund beaming like he'd accomplished something instead of sold his daughter to a probable murderer. When it was over, Clara and Colton left without speaking to anyone. Victor joined them in the carriage, took one look at Clara's face, and said nothing. They were halfway back to the ranch when Clara finally broke the silence. I should have done more, found a way to save her. You offered her a way out, Colton said. She refused it. That's not your failure, Clara. That's her choice. It's a choice made out of fear and manipulation. So was yours, Victor said quietly. Both Clara and Colton turned to stare at him. You chose to leave the Hale estate out of fear of staying and manipulation by circumstances. The difference is you chose freedom over safety. Your sister chose safety over freedom. Neither choice is wrong. They're just different. One of those choices leads to death, Clara said. Maybe, Victor agreed. Or maybe your sister will surprise you. Maybe she'll find her own way to survive. You can't know the future, Clara. All you can do is control your own choices. Clara wanted to argue, but exhaustion overwhelmed her. She leaned against Colton's shoulder and let herself grieve for the sister she couldn't save, the family she'd left behind, the life that could have been if things had been different. They reached the ranch as the sun was setting, and Clara went straight to her room. She needed to be alone, to process everything she was feeling, but sleep wouldn't come. She lay in the darkness, thinking about Vivian's face, about the resignation in her eyes, about how easily people could be broken by the world around them. Around midnight, Clara gave up on sleep and wandered downstairs. The house was quiet, everyone asleep. She headed for Victor's study, thinking she might find something to read, something to distract her mind. The door was unlocked, which was unusual. Victor was meticulous about security. Clara pushed it open and froze. The study had been ransacked. Papers everywhere, drawers pulled open, the safe in the corner standing open and empty. Clara's first instinct was to call for help, but something stopped her. She moved into the room carefully, looking for signs of what had been taken. Most of the papers were contracts and ledgers, business documents that would mean nothing to a thief. But there was one drawer that had been completely emptied, the locked drawer where Victor kept his personal correspondence. Clara knew because she'd seen him access it once during her lessons, pulling out letters to reference old agreements. She was still examining the mess when she heard footsteps. Colton appeared in the doorway, his hair mussed from sleep, his expression alert. Clara, what are you... He saw the study. What happened? Someone broke in, went through your father's papers. Clara gestured to the empty drawer. They took his personal letters. Colton's face went pale. We need to wake my father, now. Victor's rage when he saw the study was terrifying in its control. He didn't yell or throw things. He just stood very still, his face like carved stone, and assessed the damage. Who has access to this room? He asked Mrs. Chen, who'd been roused along with the rest of the household. Only you, sir, and Mr. Colton. I clean in here, but never when you're away. The window, Clara said. She'd noticed it earlier. One of the study windows was slightly open, the lock damaged. Someone came in from outside. Victor examined the window, then the grounds below. His expression was unreadable. What was in those letters? Colton asked. Things that should have stayed buried, Victor said quietly. Then he turned to face them both. Clara, Colton, sit down. There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you years ago. They sat. Mrs. Chen quietly excused herself, closing the door behind her. Victor poured himself a whiskey, drank it in one swallow, and poured another. When I first came to Montana, he began, I had nothing. Not a dollar, not a connection, not a prayer. I worked as a ranch hand for a man named Samuel Brennan. Good man, fair. He owned the land that's now the southern quarter of our holdings. Clara felt ice forming in her stomach. Samuel treated me like family, Victor continued, taught me everything about ranching, and when he got sick, when he was dying, he told me he was going to leave me the ranch in his will, said I'd earned it, said his own sons had no interest in the land. Father, Colton said quietly, what did you do? I rewrote the will. Victor's voice was flat. I had a friend in town who could forge documents. We made it look legal. Samuel died thinking his ranch was going to me legitimately. His sons tried to fight it, but they had no proof, no resources. The court sided with me. You stole it, Clara whispered. I survived, Victor corrected. I did what I had to do to build something, and I didn't stop there. He gestured to the maps on the wall. Half the land we own was acquired through similar means, forged documents, falsified surveys, water rights that weren't legally ours. I built this empire on lies and manipulation, and I kept it secret because the truth would destroy everything. Colton stood abruptly, his chair scraping back. All of it? Everything we have is based on fraud? Not everything, but enough. Victor met his son's eyes. I'm not proud of it, but I'm not ashamed either. This is how empires are built, Colton, through ruthlessness and will, through taking what others are too weak to hold, through destroying families, Claire said. Samuel Brennan's sons, what happened to them? Scattered, broken. One drank himself to death. One went east and never came back. One still in Montana, barely surviving on a small plot near the northern border. Victor's expression didn't change. I destroyed them, just like I destroyed everyone else who stood in my way. The room was silent except for the ticking of the clock on the mantel. Clara felt like the ground had opened beneath her, like everything she thought she understood about the Mercer Ranch had been revealed as a beautiful lie. Why are you telling us this now? Colton asked. Because someone stole those letters, and those letters contain proof of every crime I've committed, every forged document, every falsified claim, every piece of evidence that would put me in prison and strip us of everything we own. Victor looked at them both. Someone is coming after us, and they're going to use my own sins to destroy this ranch. Clara's mind was racing. Who would have known about the letters? Who would even know to look? Anyone I ever wronged, Victor said, which is a long list. But the break-in was professional, precise. They knew exactly where to look, which means they had inside information. Or they've been watching us, Colton said, learning our routines, our security. Clara stood and moved to the window, looking out at the dark grounds. This is connected to everything else. The fires, the water rights battle, the mining consortium. Someone's been orchestrating all of it. To what end? Victor asked. To weaken us. To make us vulnerable. Clara turned back to face them. And now they have proof that can destroy us legally. They can take everything without firing a shot. The three of them stood in the ransacked study, and Clara saw the fear in Colton's eyes, the grim acceptance in Victor's. They were cornered, trapped by the very empire they'd built and defended. But Clara's mind was already working, turning over possibilities. The letters are leverage, she said slowly. Whoever took them could have already gone to the authorities. But they haven't, which means they want something. Ransom, Colton said, or surrender. Victor's voice was harsh. They want me to step down, to give up the ranch voluntarily, to hand over everything I built. Then we don't wait for their demands, Clara said. We act first. Both men turned to stare at her. How? Colton asked. Clara moved to the desk, starting to gather the scattered papers. The letters prove your crimes, but they also prove which families you wronged. We find those families. We make it right. Offer restitution, land, money, whatever it takes to turn them from enemies into allies. That's insane, Victor said flatly. You want me to admit to crimes and pay off the victims? I'd be ruined. You're already ruined if those letters go public, Clara shot back. At least this way you control the narrative. You become the man who made mistakes but tried to fix them. The man who built an empire through questionable means but had the courage to make amends. It would cost us half the ranch, Victor said. Better half than all of it. Clara looked at him steadily. And better to lose half the ranch than your soul. Victor laughed, but it was bitter. My soul was gone a long time ago, girl. I killed it the day I forged Samuel Brennan's will. Then maybe it's time to try to get it back, Clara said quietly. The silence stretched between them. Then Colton spoke, his voice rough. She's right. We can't fight this with force or money. We have to fight it with truth. He turned to his father. You taught me that empires built on lies eventually collapse. Maybe it's time to build something that can last. Victor looked between them, his son and the woman his son had chosen. Clara saw something shift in his expression, something that might have been respect or might have been resignation. You want to tear down everything I built, he said. We want to rebuild it honestly, Clara corrected. There's a difference. Victor was silent for a long moment. Then he moved to the safe, pulling out a ledger Clara had never seen before. He set it on the desk with a heavy thud. This contains every crime I've committed, every family I destroyed, every piece of land I stole. His voice was hollow. If we're doing this, we do it completely. No half measures. We face every sin I've committed, and we make it right. Clara opened the ledger and felt her heart sink. Page after page of names, dates, crimes. Families destroyed, lives ruined, all in service of building the Mercer Empire. It would take months to untangle, years to make right. But it was possible. And possibility was all they needed. We start tomorrow, Clara said. We reach out to every family in this book. We offer restitution, apologies, whatever it takes to make peace. They won't all accept, Victor warned. Some of them will want blood. Then we give them truth instead, Colton said, and we let them choose what to do with it. They worked through the night, making lists, drafting letters, planning their campaign of redemption. By dawn, they had a strategy. It was risky, expensive, and would require Victor to admit to crimes that could still send him to prison. But it was honest. And in Clara's experience, honesty was the only foundation worth building on. The first family they approached was the Brennans, Samuel's surviving son, Michael, who ran a struggling operation near the northern border. Clara and Colton rode out to meet him, carrying an offer that would restore half of what his father had owned. Michael Brennan was in his 50s, weathered and worn by decades of hard living. He listened to their proposal with a face like granite, saying nothing until they were finished. You expect me to believe Victor Mercer suddenly grew a conscience? He asked. No, Clara said honestly. I expect you to believe that he's dying and he wants to fix what he broke before he's gone. It doesn't erase what he did, but it's something. It's blood money, Michael said flatly. It's land, Colton corrected. Land that should have been yours. We're offering to return it legally with full documentation. You can refuse if you want, but then you stay where you are, struggling, while we keep what was stolen from you. Michael's jaw worked. Why now? Why not years ago? Because we didn't have the courage years ago, Clara said quietly. We were too busy defending what we had to think about how we got it, but we're trying to be better, and we're hoping you'll let us try. Michael Brennan stared at them for a long time. Then he spat in the dust. I'll take your land, but don't think it makes us square. Don't think you can buy forgiveness with stolen property returned. My father died thinking his sons were worthless, that they'd squandered their inheritance. He died ashamed because of what Victor Mercer did. I know, Clara said, and I'm sorry for what it's worth. It's worth nothing, Michael said, but he took the papers they offered. I'll have my lawyer look these over. If they're legitimate, we have a deal. They rode away in silence, and Clara felt the weight of what they were trying to do settling over her like a shroud. This wasn't going to be clean or easy. Every family would react differently. Some would accept, some would refuse, some would demand more than they could give. But they had to try. Over the next 6 weeks, they worked their way through Victor's ledger. Some families welcomed the restitution with tears and gratitude. Others spat in their faces and swore vengeance. 3 tried to extort them for more than they were owed, and Clara had to negotiate them down. 1, the widow of a man Victor had driven to suicide, simply looked at them with empty eyes and said, "No amount of land will bring him back." And she was right. Nothing they did could undo the damage Victor had caused. But they tried anyway, because trying was all they had left. Through it all, Victor watched from the ranch, his health declining steadily. The cancer was eating him from the inside out, and everyone knew he didn't have much time left, but he kept working, kept authorizing restitution, kept facing the consequences of his choices. I'm dying anyway, he told Clara one afternoon. Might as well die honest. You're not just dying honest, Clara said. You're giving Colton a chance to inherit something clean, something he can build on without your sins dragging him down. Victor smiled, but it was tired. You're good for him. Better than I deserve. You're right, Clara agreed. I am. Victor laughed, and for a moment he looked almost peaceful. The crisis came in September, 3 weeks before Clara's wedding. A man arrived at the ranch carrying a leather satchel, the same man who'd been seen near the study window the night of the break-in. He was escorted into Victor's office by armed guards, and Clara and Colton were summoned immediately. The man was thin, nervous, maybe 40. He introduced himself as James Caldwell, and his hand shook as he opened the satchel. I have Victor Mercer's letters, he said, the ones I stole, and I'm here to return them. Clara's breath caught. Why? Because you gave my father back his land, James said. He pulled out a bundle of letters tied with string. Robert Caldwell. You restored his water rights 2 weeks ago, gave him compensation for 20 years of lost revenue. He didn't ask for it, didn't demand it. You just did it. Your father was on the list, Colton said. He was dying, James said. Same as Mr. Mercer, cancer. The doctors gave him months, and he spent those months angry, bitter, planning revenge. He hired me to steal these letters, to destroy the Mercer Ranch the way it destroyed him. James set the letters on the desk. But then you gave him his land back, and I watched my father cry for the first time since my mother died. Watched him call his grandchildren and tell them they'd have an inheritance after all. So you're returning the letters, Victor said quietly. I'm returning them because my father asked me to, James corrected. He said a man who's trying to make things right deserves a chance to finish the job. Said revenge isn't worth holding on to when forgiveness is offered. He stood. I don't know if you're really trying to change, Mr. Mercer. I don't know if you can make up for what you did, but my father thinks you're trying, and that's enough for me. He left the letters and walked out, leaving the three of them staring at the evidence of Victor's crimes. Clara picked up the bundle with trembling hands. We should burn them. No, Victor said. Lock them in the safe. They're a reminder of what I was and what I'm trying not to be anymore. He looked at Colton. When I'm gone, you decide what to do with them. Keep them as a warning or burn them to bury the past. Your choice. Why not choose now? Colton asked. Because it's not my empire anymore, Victor said. It's yours. And Clara's. I'm just the dying tyrant who built it on blood and lies. You're the ones who have to live with what comes next. That night, Clara stood on the porch watching the stars and thinking about everything that had happened. They'd faced Victor's sins, made restitution where they could, and somehow, impossibly, they'd survived. But there was still one more thing to do. Clara found Colton in the barn, checking on a mare that was close to foaling. He looked up as she approached, and something in her expression made him set down his tools. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, Clara said. But there's someone we missed on Victor's list, someone who deserves restitution but won't ask for it. Colton's eyes narrowed. Who? Vivian, Clara said quietly. Your father didn't hurt her directly, but our choices did. Our freedom cost her everything, and I think we owe her a way out. She made her choice, Colton said, but his voice was uncertain. She made a choice out of fear and desperation, Clara said, just like we did. The difference is we had options and she didn't, but maybe we can give her one now. How? Clara took a deep breath. We offer Harold Westbrook a deal. Money, land, whatever he wants, in exchange for agreeing to an annulment. We buy Vivian's freedom the same way Victor's been buying peace. With restitution. Colton was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. It'll cost a fortune. We have a fortune, Clara said. And what good is it if we can't save the people we love? They approached Victor with the plan the next morning. He listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. You want to spend a significant portion of our remaining capital to save a girl who's not even family, he said when they finished. She will be family, Clara said, when Colton and I marry. And even if she wasn't, she deserves better than the life she's trapped in. Victor studied them both. Then he pulled out his checkbook. How much do you need? The negotiation with Harold Westbrook was brief and brutal. The man had no attachment to Vivian beyond her value as a trophy and a connection to the Hale family. When Colton offered him double what Edmund Hale still owed him, plus a tract of timberland, Westbrook agreed to the annulment within an hour. "She's too young for me anyway," he said, counting the money. "Was starting to bore me." Clara wanted to hit him, wanted to rage at him for treating Vivian like property, for being willing to sell her so easily. But she swallowed her anger and took the signed annulment papers. They rode to the Westbrook estate that same day, where Vivian had been living for less than 2 months. The house was a mansion, all dark wood and heavy furniture, oppressive in its wealth. Vivian met them in the parlor, her face pale and drawn. She'd lost weight, Clara noticed, and there was a bruise on her wrist, barely visible beneath her sleeve. "What are you doing here?" Vivian asked. Her voice was flat, dead. Clara handed her the annulment papers. "You're free. Harold's agreed to let you go. The marriage is over." Vivian stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. "I don't understand." "We bought your freedom," Colton said. "The marriage is legally dissolved. You can leave. Come back to the Mercer Ranch. Go anywhere you want. You're not bound to him anymore." Vivian started shaking. "Why would you do this?" "Because you're my sister," Clara said quietly, "and because I should have done it 2 months ago." Vivian looked up, and Clara saw tears streaming down her face. "He hits me," she whispered, "when I don't smile enough, when dinner isn't perfect, when I don't—" Her voice broke. "I wanted to leave. I tried to run. But Father said I'd made my choice and I had to live with it." Clara pulled her sister into her arms, and Vivian collapsed against her, sobbing. All the anger, all the resentment, all the bitter words between them evaporated in the face of Vivian's pain. "You're safe now," Clara said. "I promise. You're safe." They took Vivian back to the Mercer Ranch that same day, leaving Harold Westbrook and his dark house behind. Edmund Hale sent angry letters demanding they return his daughter, but Victor had his lawyers shut down every attempt. Vivian was 22, legally divorced, and free to make her own choices. And for the first time in her life, she was choosing herself. Clara watched her sister slowly come back to life over the following weeks. Vivian was tentative at first, still expecting punishment for any mistake. But gradually, she started to smile again, started to speak without fear, started to become the person she might have been if fear hadn't shaped her entire life. "Thank you," Vivian said one evening. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sun set. "For saving me." "You would have done the same," Clara said. "No," Vivian said honestly. "I wouldn't have. I was too angry, too bitter, too convinced that your happiness meant my suffering." She paused. "I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Clara took her sister's hand. "We were both trapped, just in different cages. I'm just glad we're both free now." And as the sun sank below the mountains, Clara felt something settle in her chest. The pieces of her life, the broken parts, the scared parts, the parts she'd thought were lost forever, were finally coming together into something whole. She'd faced Victor's sins and helped him make amends. She'd saved her sister from a fate worse than death. She'd proven her worth not through perfection, but through courage and compassion. And in 3 weeks, she'd marry Colton Mercer and become part of this empire they were rebuilding from honesty instead of lies. It wasn't the life she'd imagined when she'd ridden away from the Hale estate all those months ago. It was better. The morning of Clara's wedding dawned clear and cold, the kind of October day that made the Montana sky look infinite. She stood at her window watching the ranch come alive below, hands moving cattle, smoke rising from the cookhouse, the rhythms of work that never stopped even for celebration. In 3 hours, she would marry Colton Mercer. In 3 hours, the wrong daughter would become the heart of an empire. "You're going to freeze standing there in your nightgown," Vivian said from the doorway. She carried a breakfast tray, steam rising from the coffee. "Mrs. Chen sent this up, said you need to eat something before you faint at the altar." Clara accepted the coffee gratefully. "I'm not going to faint." "No," Vivian agreed, settling onto the bed. "You're going to stand there like you own the world and dare anyone to say different." She smiled, and it reached her eyes for the first time in years. "I'm proud of you, you know, for everything you've done, everything you've become." "I'm just surviving," Clara said. "No." Vivian's voice was firm. You're thriving. There's a difference. I survived for 22 years. You taught me what thriving looks like. Clara sat beside her sister, their shoulders touching. You're thriving too. I see it every day, the way you laugh now, the way you don't flinch when someone raises their voice. That's because of you, Vivian said quietly. You saved me. Not just from Harold, but from myself, from believing I had to accept whatever life gave me. She paused. I'm going to leave after the wedding. Clara's hand tightened on her cup. Leave? Not forever, but I need to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be what everyone else wants. Vivian's expression was determined. There's a teaching position in Helena for a girls' school. They need someone to teach music and French. It doesn't pay much, but it's mine. Something I earned, not something handed to me or taken from someone else. Clara felt tears burning behind her eyes. When did you arrange this? Last week. Colton helped me with the application letters. Vivian smiled. He said you'd be proud. Are you? More than you know, Clara whispered. She pulled her sister into a fierce hug. You're going to be amazing. I'm going to try, Vivian said. That's all any of us can do. They stayed that way for a moment, two sisters who'd spent their whole lives as rivals, finally becoming the allies they should have been all along. Then Vivian pulled back, wiping her eyes. Now get dressed before Mrs. Chen comes up here and drags you to the bath herself. You're getting married today, and you're going to look spectacular doing it. The dress was simpler than what most brides wore. Cream silk instead of white, with minimal lace and no train to trip over. Mrs. Chen had insisted on small pearl buttons down the back, and Vivian's hands were steady as she fastened them. You look beautiful, Vivian said. Different than I imagined, but better. More you. Clara studied herself in the mirror. The woman looking back wasn't the broken ranch girl who'd left the Hale estate 6 months ago. She was stronger, harder, tempered by fire and work and the constant battle to prove herself. But there was softness, too. In her eyes when she thought of Colton, in her smile when she watched Vivian healing, in the careful way she'd learned to balance strength with compassion. She was still Clara Hale, but she was also becoming Clara Mercer. And the combination of those two identities felt right in a way nothing else ever had. A knock at the door interrupted her reflection. Mrs. Chen entered, her expression more emotional than Clara had ever seen it. Mr. Victor would like to see you, she said, before the ceremony. Clara found Victor in his study, seated at the desk that had become both his command center and his confessional. He looked smaller than he had 6 months ago, the cancer eating away at him day by day. But his eyes were still sharp, still assessing. You clean up well, he said by way of greeting. Thank you for noticing. Claire closed the door behind her. You wanted to see me? I wanted to give you something. Victor pulled open a drawer and removed a wooden box, worn smooth with age. This was my wife's, Colton's mother. I want you to have it. Clara opened the box carefully. Inside was a silver bracelet, delicate but strong, engraved with a pattern of intertwined vines. She wore it every day, Victor said. Said it reminded her that strength and beauty could exist in the same place. That hard things could still be lovely. He paused. I think she would have liked you, would have been proud of what you've done for this ranch, for my son. Claire's throat tightened. I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep fighting for this place, keep making it better. Victor's voice was rough. I built this empire on blood and lies, but you and Colton, you're rebuilding it on truth. That's worth more than all the land I ever stole. We couldn't have done it without you, Claire said, without you choosing to face what you'd done. I had help. Victor smiled slightly. A stubborn ranch girl who wouldn't let me take the easy way out, who kept pushing me to be better even when I didn't want to be. Clara moved around the desk and did something she never thought she'd do. She hugged Victor Mercer. He stiffened for a moment, then his arms came up to return the embrace. Thank you, Clara whispered, for giving Colton a chance to inherit something worth having, for letting me help rebuild what was broken. Thank you for not giving up on us, Victor replied. Any of us. When Clara pulled back, there were tears on Victor's weathered face. He wiped them away impatiently. Get married, girl, and then get back to work. This ranch doesn't run itself. Clara laughed through her own tears. Yes, sir. The ceremony was held outside, under the aspens that blazed gold against the blue Montana sky. Everyone who mattered was there. The ranch hands who'd learned to respect Clara's grit, the neighboring ranchers who'd made peace with the Mercers, the families they'd made restitution to, all gathered to witness the union that had started as rebellion and become something far more profound. Thomas Quinn stood as one of Colton's witnesses, a symbol of the alliance they'd forged from conflict. Vivian stood as Clara's, her face glowing with genuine happiness. And Victor sat in the front row, dying but defiant, determined to see his son married before the cancer claimed him. Judge Morrison performed the ceremony with grudging professionalism. He'd fought the marriage for months, but even he had to acknowledge that Clara had proven herself in ways that mattered. She'd saved the ranch from war, brokered peace with enemies, and helped Victor face his sins with courage that most men lacked. She was no longer the nobody from a failing ranch. She was Clara Mercer. And that name meant something now. Colton stood waiting at the makeshift altar, and when Clara walked toward him through the rows of chairs, his expression shifted into something that made her breath catch. Not just love, though that was there, but partnership, recognition, the look of someone who'd found their equal and knew how rare that was. "You look terrified," Colton said quietly as she reached him. "I am," Clara admitted. "This is real now. No turning back." "Do you want to turn back?" Clara looked at the life spread before her, the ranch they'd fought for, the family they'd saved, the empire they were rebuilding with honesty instead of lies. She looked at the man who'd chosen her when the world said he shouldn't, who'd stood beside her through every battle and never once asked her to be less than she was. "Not for anything," she said. Judge Morrison cleared his throat. "If we could begin?" The ceremony was brief. Clara barely heard the words. Her attention was on Colton's hands holding hers, on the weight of Victor's bracelet on her wrist, on Vivian's quiet tears of joy. When Morrison finally pronounced them married, Colton kissed her with a tenderness that made the watching crowd cheer. "Mrs. Mercer," he said against her lips. "How does it feel?" "Like coming home," Clara replied. "Finally." The reception was held in the barn, which had been transformed with lanterns and ribbons and long tables groaning with food. Clara danced with Colton first, then with Victor, who moved slowly but determinedly, refusing to let cancer rob him of this moment. "You did it," he said as they swayed to the music. "You married him, became part of this family for real." "I've been part of this family since the day I stopped that fire," Clara said. "The wedding just made it official." Victor smiled. "You're right. But I'm glad we made it official anyway. Gives you legal claim to everything when I'm gone. Can't have anyone questioning whether you belong here." "Victor, I'm dying, Clara. We both know it. But I'm going to make sure you and Colton have everything you need to keep this place running." His expression turned serious. "There's one more thing I need to tell you. One more secret." Clara felt ice forming in her stomach. "What?" "The letters James Caldwell returned. They weren't the only copies." Victor's voice was quiet. "I made duplicates years ago. Hid them in 3 different locations just in case. Insurance, I called it. Leverage if anyone ever tried to destroy me." "Where are they?" "One sets in a bank vault in Denver. One's buried on the northern property line. And one's with my lawyer in Helena." Victor met her eyes. "When I die, they revert to Colton's control. But I'm giving you the key to the vault and the location of the buried set. Because if anything ever happens to my son, if anyone ever tries to take this ranch from you, those letters are your nuclear option. Evidence of every crime I committed, yes, but also proof of every restitution we made. Documentation that we tried to fix what was broken." "Why tell me this, Wire?" Clara asked. "Because you're the only one ruthless enough to use them if you have to, and honest enough not to use them unless you must." Victor's grip tightened. "Protect my son, Clara. Protect this ranch, even if it means burning everything I built to save what matters." "I will," Clara promised. "I swear it." They finished the dance in silence, and Clara felt the weight of one more secret settling over her shoulders. But this one didn't feel like a burden. It felt like armor. As the night wore on, Clara found herself outside, needing air and space to process everything. She stood by the corral, watching the horses move restlessly in the moonlight, and let herself feel the magnitude of what she'd done. 6 months ago, she'd been nobody, a servant in her own home, invisible and worthless. And now she was married to one of the most powerful men in Montana, helping to run an empire, making decisions that affected hundreds of lives. It should have been impossible, should have been a fantasy, but it was real. She'd made it real through stubbornness and work, and refusing to accept that the world's limits applied to her. There you are. Colton appeared beside her, his jacket discarded, his sleeves rolled up. People are asking for the bride. Let them ask, Clara said. I needed a moment to remember how to breathe. Colton leaned against the fence beside her. Overwhelming? Terrifying, Clara corrected. I keep waiting for someone to tell me this is all a mistake, that I don't belong here. Who gets to decide where you belong? Colton asked. Them or you? Clara thought about that. Thought about every person who told her she wasn't good enough. Her father, Margaret Morrison, the ranch hands who'd dismissed her, the society wives who'd scorned her. Thought about how she'd proven every single one of them wrong. Me, she said finally. I get to decide. Then decide. Colton's voice was gentle. Do you belong here? Clara looked at the ranch spread out before them, the land they'd fought for, the people they'd made peace with, the future they were building together. She looked at the man beside her who'd seen value where everyone else saw failure, who'd chosen strength over beauty, who trusted her to help rebuild what his father had broken. Yes, Clara said, I belong here, not because I married you, because I earned it. Colton smiled. Good, because this ranch needs you. I need you, and I'm not letting you forget it. They stood together in the Montana night, husband and wife, partners in every sense that mattered, and Clara felt something she'd never felt before, certainty. Not that everything would be easy, but that whatever came, they'd face it together. The crisis came 2 weeks later, just as Clara was beginning to relax into married life. Victor collapsed during breakfast, his coffee cup shattering on the floor. They rushed him to his room, sent for the doctor, but everyone knew what this meant. The cancer had reached its final stage. Victor was dying, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. He lasted 3 days, fading in and out of consciousness. Colton barely left his side, and Clara sat with them both, keeping vigil as the man who'd built an empire slowly let it go. On the 3rd day, Victor woke with sudden clarity. His eyes found Colton first. You're going to be fine, Victor said, his voice weak but certain. You've got her, that's all you need. Father, Colton's voice broke. Don't waste time grieving, Victor interrupted. Take what I built and make it better. Fix what I couldn't. Be the man I should have been. He turned to Clara. And you, keep him honest. Keep him human. Don't let this place turn him into what I was. I won't, Clara promised. Victor smiled. I know, that's why I gave you the keys to destroy everything. Insurance against my own legacy. He closed his eyes. Samuel Brennan. Tell his son I'm sorry. Tell all of them I'm sorry. We already did, Clara said gently. They know. They forgave you. Then I can go, Victor whispered. He died an hour later with Colton holding one hand and Clara holding the other. The tyrant who'd built an empire on blood and lies passed quietly, having spent his final months trying to make amends for a lifetime of sins. It wasn't redemption, but it was something. The funeral was attended by hundreds, people Victor had wronged and people he'd helped, enemies and allies, all gathered to pay their respects to a man who'd been larger than life even as he was dying. Clara stood beside Colton as they lowered Victor into the ground, and she felt the weight of what they'd inherited settling over them both. This was theirs now. The ranch, the empire, the responsibility. And everyone was watching to see what they'd do with it. After the funeral, the ranch hands and key partners gathered in the study, the same room where Victor had taught Clara about power and politics, where they'd made plans to fix what was broken. Thomas Quinn was there, along with Michael Brennan and representatives from the families they'd made restitution to. Colton stood at the head of the table, and Clara stood beside him, equal partners, just as they'd always been. My father built this ranch through force and fraud, Colton began. We all know that now, and over the past months we've tried to make amends, to return land, pay restitution, build bridges instead of burning them. He paused. But there's more work to do, more families to make peace with, more wounds to heal. So we're asking for help, Clara continued, not just in running this operation, but in rebuilding it completely. We want to create a model for what ranching in Montana can be, profitable, but fair, powerful, but honest. We want to prove that empires don't have to be built on blood. That's a nice speech, one of the representatives said. But words are cheap. What are you actually offering? Partnership, Colton said. Real partnership. We're restructuring the ranch as a cooperative. Major landowners get shares proportional to their holdings. Decisions about expansion, water rights, and resource allocation get made collectively, not unilaterally. And profits get distributed fairly based on contribution. The room erupted in shocked conversation. Thomas Quinn's eyebrows had climbed toward his hairline. "You're giving away control of the Mercer Ranch?" he asked. "We're sharing control," Clara corrected. "There's a difference. Colton and I will still manage day-to-day operations, but major decisions, the kind that affect everyone, those get made together. No more land grabs, no more water wars, no more one family deciding what's best for everyone else." "Your father would be horrified," Michael Brennan said. But he was smiling. "My father was wrong about a lot of things," Colton replied. "But he was right about one thing. You need power to survive in this world. We're just choosing to share that power instead of hoarding it." "What's to stop someone from voting you out?" another rancher asked. "Taking control and running things their way?" "Nothing," Clara said honestly, "except the fact that we've proven we can make this work, that we care about more than just profit, that we're willing to fight for what's right even when it's not easy." She paused. "And if we fail, if we're not the leaders this operation needs, then maybe someone else should take over. Maybe that's what actual accountability looks like." The silence stretched as everyone processed what they were offering. It was radical, possibly insane. Giving up the absolute power that Victor had fought his whole life to accumulate. But it was also honest. And in Clara's experience, honesty was the only foundation worth building on. Thomas Quinn stood, and Clara held her breath. "I'm in," he said. "If you're serious about this, about really sharing power instead of just playing at democracy, then you've got my support." Michael Brennan stood next. "Mine too. My father would have loved to see the Mercer Empire transformed into something fair. I'll honor his memory by helping make it happen." One by one, the others stood. Not all of them. There were holdouts, skeptics who'd need more proof before committing, but enough. Enough to make the cooperative real. Enough to prove that change was possible. Over the following months, they worked to implement the new structure. It was messy, complicated, full of arguments and disagreements and moments when Clara thought the whole thing would collapse. But slowly, painfully, it came together. Land was redistributed based on historical claims and modern needs. Water rights were allocated fairly, with protections against hoarding. Profits were shared proportionally, and decisions were made through votes instead of decrees. The Mercer Ranch stopped being a kingdom and became something closer to a community. And Clara stood at the center of it all, negotiating disputes, brokering compromises, proving day after day that the wrong daughter had become the exact right leader. Vivian sent letters from Helena, full of stories about her students and her growing confidence. She'd started courting a bookshop owner, a quiet man who loved her for her mind instead of her face. Clara read each letter with a smile, proud of the woman her sister was becoming. Edmund Hale died in February, drunk and alone, his estate finally collapsing under the weight of his debts. Clara felt nothing when she heard the news. That man had stopped being her father the moment he'd called her worthless. She buried him without tears and moved on. Margaret Morrison tried one last time to destroy Clara's reputation, spreading rumors about impropriety and manipulation. But Clara had earned too much respect, proven herself too thoroughly. The rumors fell flat, and Margaret retreated into bitter obscurity. Spring came, and with it, Clara discovered she was pregnant. She told Colton one evening on the porch, watching the sun set over the land they'd fought so hard to transform. His expression shifted through shock, joy, and terror in rapid succession. "We're going to have a baby," he said, like he needed to hear the words out loud. "We are," Clara confirmed. "Are you ready?" Colton laughed. "I wasn't ready for any of this. Wasn't ready to marry you, wasn't ready to fight my father, wasn't ready to rebuild an empire. But we did it anyway." He pulled her close. We'll figure this out too. Clara leaned into his warmth, one hand on her still flat stomach. She thought about the child growing there, about the world they'd be born into. Not perfect, not without conflict, but honest. Built on truth instead of lies, on partnership instead of tyranny, a world where the wrong daughter had become the woman who changed everything. The baby was born in November during the first snowfall of the season. A girl, with Colton's gray eyes and Clara's stubborn chin. They named her Victoria, after the grandfather who'd learned too late that empires built on blood eventually collapse, but also after the victory of rebuilding something better from the ashes. Clara held her daughter and thought about all the women who'd been told they weren't good enough, weren't strong enough, weren't worth the space they occupied. Thought about the cages women built for themselves out of fear and expectation, and the courage it took to break free. "You're going to have choices," Clara whispered to Victoria. "Real choices, not the illusion of them. And whatever you choose, whether it's running this ranch or leaving it behind, whether it's strength or softness, or some combination of both, it's going to be yours. Nobody gets to decide your worth except you." Colton stood beside them, his hand gentle on Clara's shoulder. "She's going to be just like you, terrifying and unstoppable." "Hopefully a little less terrifying," Clara said. But she was smiling. Years passed. The cooperative flourished, becoming a model that other regions studied and attempted to replicate. The Mercer Ranch, now technically the Montana Valley Cooperative, though everyone still called it the Mercer Ranch out of habit, became known not for ruthless expansion, but for fair dealing and honest leadership. Clara and Colton had 2 more children, both boys who grew up learning that strength meant protecting the vulnerable, not dominating them. Victoria grew into a fierce, intelligent girl who announced at age 7 that she was going to be the first woman governor of Montana, and nobody doubted her. Vivian married her bookshop owner and opened a school for girls who'd been told they weren't smart enough for higher education. She visited often, bringing her students to see the ranch and meet the woman who'd shown her that escape was possible. Thomas Quinn became one of Clara's closest advisors. His initial skepticism transformed into deep respect. Michael Brennan named Clara as godmother to his youngest daughter, a gesture that meant more to her than any political victory. And Clara herself became something she'd never imagined, a legend. The ranch girl who'd married into power and used it to transform an entire region. The wrong daughter who'd proven that worth wasn't determined by birth or beauty or what others thought, but by courage and choice and the refusal to accept that the world's limits applied to you. She stood on the porch one evening, 20 years after she'd first ridden away from the Hale estate, and looked out over the empire she'd helped rebuild. Colton appeared beside her, his hair showing gray now, his face weathered by decades of sun and work. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How far we've come," Clara said. "How impossible all of this would have seemed when we started. Do you ever regret it, choosing this life?" Clara thought about that question honestly. She thought about the struggles, the battles, the moments when she'd been certain they'd fail. She thought about Victor's sins and her father's cruelty, about Vivian's pain and her own fears. But she also thought about the families they'd helped, the land they'd restored, the empire they'd transformed from tyranny into community. She thought about her children, growing up free to choose their own paths. She thought about standing beside Colton through every battle, equal partners building something that would last. "Not for a second," she said finally. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be." Even though it was hard? Especially because it was hard. Clara took his hand. "Easy things don't change the world. They just maintain it. And I never wanted to maintain anything. I wanted to transform it." "Mission accomplished," Colton said. He kissed her temple. "You know, my father told me once that you'd either save me or destroy me. Turns out he was right. You destroyed everything I thought I had to be and saved everything I actually wanted to become." "We saved each other," Clara corrected. "That's how partnership works." They stood together as the sun set over the valley. 2 people who'd started as strangers bound by rebellion and become partners bound by love and respect and shared purpose. The empire they'd inherited had been built on blood and lies, but the one they'd created was built on honesty and courage, and the radical belief that power could be shared instead of hoarded. It wasn't perfect. There were still conflicts, still struggles, still moments when the old ways of thinking tried to reassert themselves. But Clara had learned that perfection wasn't the goal. Growth was. Change was. The constant difficult work of choosing to be better than what came before. She'd been the wrong daughter, the unwanted one, the girl who fixed fences while her sister learned piano. She'd been called worthless, treated like furniture, told she'd never amount to anything, and she'd proven every single one of them wrong, not by becoming what they wanted, but by becoming exactly what she chose to be. Clara Mercer, once Clara Hale, the girl who didn't matter, had built a legacy that would outlast her, not through force or fraud, but through the simple, radical act of choosing herself, of demanding to be seen, of refusing to accept that her worth was determined by anyone except her. And as she stood on that porch, surrounded by the life she'd built from courage and stubbornness and an absolute refusal to surrender, Clara understood something profound. The wrong daughter hadn't been wrong at all. She'd been exactly right. She'd just been in the wrong place, with the wrong people, being measured against the wrong standards. And the moment she'd had the courage to leave, to choose herself, to build something new from the ashes of what others thought she should be, that's when she'd finally become who she was always meant to be. Not a servant, not a decoration, not a mistake, but a force of nature, a builder of empires, a woman who'd looked at the world's limits and chosen to ignore them, a woman who'd saved herself, and in doing so, had saved everyone around her. Clara Mercer smiled as the last light faded from the Montana sky, and she felt the deep, bone-deep satisfaction of a life lived on her own terms. It was enough. It was everything. And she'd earned every single piece of it.